5 years ago, people with supernatural abilities began to appear, changing the world completely. Subsequently, mixed martial arts split into two distinct categories, Abilities User League and the Non-Abilities User League. A strange girl wants to revive this fading Non-Abilities League. She thinks that despite the league's significant debt, it's foolish to hand over the leadership so easily, and wonders if they do not understand the undervaluation of mixed martial arts. The girl also thinks that it's such underappreciated sports represent the perfect opportunity for success, and if she succeed in revitalizing the league, it's still a surefire way to raking up a lot of money. During the MMA fight, one of the fighters asks the opponent if he should just use his left hand, but the opponent gets furious and charges at him. With just one uppercut, the guy managed to knock out his opponent brutally. He then sits on top of him and continues to throw punches at his face one after another. It turns out, he is Hwang Kwang-ho, a MMA champion with a professional record of 49 wins and 1 loss. But there's a reason why he was permanently banned, and it's all because of his provocative behavior and taunts. However, it's not just limited to taunts but because of his dirty fighting style, and because of a certain incident. From the girl's perspective, Kwang-ho is absolutely crucial to what she is trying to accomplish, especially right now during this particular stretch in the league when all the key indicators have hit their highest point. She thinks to herself that most people around them probably have no idea what is really going on, but she can see clearly that every single stunt this guy pulls is completely calculated for maximum publicity, and that he carries a genuinely rare and natural-born talent for drawing attention to himself that most people could never replicate no matter how hard they tried. What makes the whole thing even more baffling to her, however, is the stark contrast between that brilliance and his actual day-to-day behavior, because ever since his comeback Kwang-ho has been moving through life like an absolute lazy sloth and spending the vast majority of his time doing nothing more than endlessly scrolling through TikTok like he has not a single care in the world. The girl reaches her limit and lets her frustration out, reminding him sharply that the whole reason she brought him back was on the specific condition that he would actually help with improving the ratings and deliver on that promise. Kwang-ho then holds up his phone and shows her a collection of articles that have been making the rounds online, all of them centered around fighting-related content. The girl looks through them and immediately gets excited about the concept of a fight being set up between an ability user and a non-ability user, thinking to herself that viewers are absolutely going to eat that kind of content up. She wastes no time and heads straight out to go scout an ability user for the matchup, and before long she spots one and walks over to approach them. The ability user stops her before she can get too far into her pitch and warns her that when someone awakens their abilities, their physical capabilities get noticeably enhanced across the board as a side effect, and that this makes interactions with them genuinely dangerous for regular people who do not have any abilities of their own. Kwang-ho starts throwing provocations at him one after another, but none of it lands the way he wants it to as the ability user simply kicks them both out without taking the bait. That same evening, the girl comes back and tries to meet with the ability user again, but this time around he responds by shoving her hard to the ground the moment she gets close enough. The girl immediately starts apologizing and trying to explain herself for what happened earlier, but the guy is not interested in hearing any of it and moves to attack her anyway. Kwang-ho manages to get there just in time and pulls her out of the way at the very last second before anything serious can happen. He then steps up and goes head-to-head directly against the ability user himself, and the sheer level of performance he puts on display is enough to genuinely shock the girl who is watching from the side. Kwang-ho goes toe-to-toe with the ability user who has 6 arms and does not back down for even a moment, even landing a clean punch directly into his face at one point during the exchange. As the fight goes on, Kwang-ho methodically manages to break his bones one by one until the ability user has nothing left to fight back with. After everything settles down and the fight is over, Kwang-ho casually reveals that he had been recording the entire thing on his phone from the very beginning. He explains to the girl that the more people who are watching something like this live, the easier it becomes to frame the whole thing as clear-cut self-defense when anyone tries to question it afterward. Kwang-ho then turns back to the live stream and starts provoking every other ability user he can see watching, going through them one by one, until the girl finally steps in and puts a stop to it before things can escalate any further. Kwang-ho's provocation spread like wildfire, and this kind of provocation wouldn't normally cause such of a stir. The girl gets annoyed to hear people talking about this all the time and wonders what would happen if Kwang-ho loses to an ability user. Provocation is the superiority complex of the ability user, and the sense of injustice felt by those non-ability users. That day, Kwang-ho gets bored sitting in the office wondering why a single ability user hasn't approached him yet. Out of nowhere, the girl starts laughing like a maniac as if a ghost just exchanged souls with her. Kwang-ho looks at her expression and thinks to himself that she might actually be coming to him with some good news for once, but the girl completely switches up her attitude and tells him that there is indeed some good news, and that good news is that Kwang Ho has been permanently banned once again. She also calls him out on the fact that his honorifics have completely disappeared from how he speaks to her and demands to know why he has been talking to her so informally ever since the last incident. Kwang Ho shrugs it off and says that since he is going to end up getting expelled either way, there really is not much point in keeping up with honorifics at this stage. Kwang Ho then looks at her and says that he can tell she is panicking right now and wants her to understand that she is now sitting in exactly the same boat as him whether she likes it or not. He also points out that no matter how many times she goes around telling people that she had nothing to do with any of this and that everything is entirely Kwang Ho's fault alone, people out there are simply not going to buy that story and she is going to be tied to it regardless of what she says. The girl then asks him straight up whether saving him in the first place was all just part of some plan leading to this exact moment, and Kwang Ho looks at her and says that it really does not matter either way at this point. The girl then lashes out on him saying this provocation is the bigger issue and if he loses the first match, all this attention will go into criticism. She also asks him if he has a plan hoping that he does, but Kwang Ho straight away says that he has no plan. Out of nowhere, a guy wearing a suit teleport in the room, saying he is someone who isn't afraid of Kwang Ho. Kwang Ho asks him if he wants to fight here, but the guy says that if they will fight, they are going to fight at the pro arena. Before any of that gets settled, the ability user turns to Kwang Ho and asks him to go ahead and try landing a punch on his jaw just once to see what happens. Hearing that, the girl immediately jumps in and tells Kwang Ho not to fall for such an obvious provocation and tells him to just calm down and ignore it. Kwang Ho reassures her with a relaxed expression that he is not going to do anything and that she does not need to worry about it. Then in an instant that catches everyone off guard, Kwang Ho drives a punch straight into the guy's jaw without any further warning, and rather than getting angry about it the guy just looks at Kwang Ho and tells him that he likes him. After that moment passes, the guy's assistant steps forward and starts reading through the details of the match contract out loud, and when Kwang Ho's girl goes through it herself she quickly realizes that the terms laid out in it are remarkably and surprisingly favorable to their side in ways she was not expecting at all. Before the ability user leaves, he manages to break through one of the walls on his way out, and the girl immediately insists that the cost of repairing that needs to be included and compensated for somewhere in the contract as well. Within the DK League, fighters are organized and assigned to matches based on a ranking system built around colors, and sitting at the very top of that color hierarchy is black, which represents the highest and most elite tier a fighter can reach. As it turns out, this rare and prestigious distinction has currently only been granted to 3 fighters, and one of them is a man named Paul Roney who goes by the nickname Terminus. The reason that nickname has stuck to him is straightforward and impossible to argue with, which is the simple fact that every single fighter who has ever stepped up to face him has always ended up meeting their own personal terminus by the time the fight is over. Later on, the girl is still sitting deep in her own thoughts, turning the situation over and over in her head as she thinks about the fact that there are only 9 days left until the big day arrives. She keeps coming back to the same problem, which is that she needs to find some kind of way to either put a stop to the match before it happens or find a legitimate reason to terminate the contract entirely. When she finally steps out of her building and heads outside, she is immediately met with the sight of a crowd of reporters completely surrounding Kwang Ho, and one of them is already getting visibly heated and lashing out at him. The reporter is furious because Kwang Ho had publicly said he was not going to be training, but footage of him doing exactly that has been leaking out everywhere and completely contradicting what he told everyone. The girl then steps in and tries to get rid of all of them, asking them loudly what exactly they think they are doing showing up at her office like this. One of the reporters turns to her and lets her know that every single person there was personally invited by Kwang Ho himself for an interview, and adds that it was not just this group either because people from a broadcasting station had already come by and left earlier in the day as well. 3 days pass, and the girl walks into the gym to find Kwang Ho in the middle of a full training session, and she immediately tells him to stop what he is doing. Kwang Ho asks her if she is aware that there are only 6 days left until the match. The girl tells him that they can't continue like this as she knows he has been treating her like a scarecrow, and she could have tolerated if the results have been good. She says that they have reached to a point with no return, and she can't let his impulsive actions slide anymore. She then gets furious at him saying she already told him this match is a setup and they are just trying to use them. Besides, the opponent is one of the top-level fighters in the DK League. She then comes to a conclusion that they have to win no matter what, whether his opponent is Paul Roney or someone else, he must win. The girl turns to him once again and asks him straight up whether he seriously does not have any kind of plan in place, pointing out that he was the one who told her they were on the same page and working toward the same thing. What he says next catches her completely off guard, as Kwang Ho tells her that he does in fact have a plan, and that plan is simply to lose. He then explains that he has spent the entire past 10 days thinking through and preparing for every possible angle of how he might be able to actually beat Paul Roney, turning it over in his head from every direction he can think of. Kwang Ho adds that if they had given him even a little more time on top of that, he might have actually landed on something that could work, but the girl immediately asks him why he did not just decline the match in the first place if that was the situation. He tells her that if he had gone ahead and declined, they were never just going to let that slide and walk away from it, and then he leans in close and whispers something directly into her ear that lays out the real details of what his actual plan is. 6 days pass, and the day of the highly anticipated match between an ability user and a non-ability user finally arrives, with the energy and excitement around it having been building to an almost unbearable level. Everyone in attendance is buzzing with the question of whether Kwang Ho is actually going to be able to back up all the provocations he has been throwing around and take real responsibility for every single thing he said. Right from the opening moment of the match, Kwang Ho comes out and launches a brutal and relentless attack on his opponent, and before long he manages to pull off the win in a way that makes him look every bit like the villain everyone has been calling him. After that, the entire crowd completely turns on Kwang Ho and people start hurling insults at him from every direction while also throwing whatever junk they can get their hands on down into the ring. The referee steps in and tells Kwang Ho directly that he committed a foul and that there are consequences for that, but Kwang Ho pushes right back and pokes at the referee by pointing out that if a foul was committed then he should already be disqualified and done with it. Right at that moment, the bouncers come storming into the ring and slam Kwang Ho down to the ground as he keeps arguing that they should just call the whole match off and end it here. However, Paul Roney gets back to his feet and steps in, saying that what happened is not going to be called a foul at all and that they are going to officially classify it as an accident instead and move on from it. As it turns out, fouls do exist even within the DK League and cover things like eye gouging, soccer kicks, and stomping, all of which are considered violations of the rules. Because of that, getting disqualified through deliberate foul play carries just as much of a reputation-damaging effect as being labeled a full-blown villain in the public eye, but at the same time it can also flip into an opportunity if played correctly, turning what could be a crisis-level situation into a moment that actually draws massive public attention and interest. This time around though, Kwang Ho finds himself genuinely confused and thinks about why the match did not come to a stop the way he expected, and when he looks out at the crowd he sees that every single person in the building is on their feet cheering loudly for Paul Roney. Ironically, Kwang Ho's foul ended up making the execution even more iconic. Kwang Ho decides to run in the octagon because the diameter of the octagon is 11.5 meter and unlike boxing ring, with its octagonal structure, there are no corners. Paul then charges at Kwang Ho with a punch but he just dodges him and hits him with an elbow strike. After that, Paul Roney throws a counterpunch with so much strength that Kwang Ho goes flying. Seeing that, the commentator says that Kwang Ho seems to be under some sort of delusion and he forgot that this isn't some mixed martial arts match. The other commentator wonders if Kwang Ho come to this match without even preparing a countermeasure for this ability. The girl on the other hand tries to ask the referee why the game is still ongoing when Kwang Ho committed a foul. The referee however completely ignores her and acts as though she said nothing at all. It is in that moment that she comes to the realization that the DK League itself is the one that gets to decide whether a disqualification is valid or not, and on top of that the audience is not seeing anything wrong with what is happening either. She thinks to herself that from the very beginning everyone in this building has been operating with a clear bias, and that the people who showed up and filled these seats today are nothing more than dedicated fans of the DK League's black-tier fighter Paul Roney and are never going to see things any other way. The girl then starts turning over another option in her head, thinking that if getting a disqualification pushed through is off the table, then maybe forfeiting is the next logical move to consider. But then she thinks back to Kwang Ho's first match and how he managed to pull in the attention of practically everyone watching, and she realizes that if they go ahead and forfeit now, everything that was built in that moment gets wiped out completely and it would essentially be the end of everything they have been working toward. Then out of nowhere, Paul Roney casually lowers himself down and stretches out flat on the octagon floor, telling everyone within earshot that he is simply waiting for the first round to come to its end. After that, the whole crowd erupts into laughter directed straight at Kwang Ho, while Paul Roney looks over at him and tells him that if he just wrapped this whole thing up quickly and easily, it would honestly just be too boring to be worth his time. When the first round comes to an end, the girl rushes over to Kwang Ho and asks him if he is doing okay, and he tells her that he just took a little cut and bled a bit but that nothing about it is serious enough to worry about. Kwang Ho also brings up the observation that the other guy has clearly been holding his strength back just enough to keep things within the bounds of what the match allows without crossing any lines that would disrupt it. The girl then leans in and tells Kwang Ho that the smartest move right now would be to just go ahead and forfeit the match before things get any worse, but Kwang Ho shoots that down immediately and tells her that forfeiting is simply not something he is willing to do. The girl gets visibly frustrated and raises her voice at him, saying that if they keep going all they are going to walk away with is ridicule from everyone watching, and that continuing on this path is only going to leave them in a position where they get exploited even more than they already have been. She also tells him that she understands perfectly well that he does not want to sit here and admit that his judgment was off, but that the sooner he is willing to acknowledge that reality, the wiser and more practical it becomes to start focusing on limiting the damage before it gets out of hand. Kwang Ho, however, refuses to budge on the forfeit and tells her flat out that he is going to make every single person in that audience regret every doubt they had about him before this is over. As it turns out, in order to participate in the DK League at any level, a fighter must have already gone through the manifestation of their abilities as a baseline requirement, and only after that manifestation has occurred are they considered eligible to enter and compete in the amateur league. After clearing all of that, the next requirement is that they must go out and win a match and obtain a pro card before they can move any further along the path. Once they have that pro card in hand, they earn the right to step into the lower league of the DK League and compete there, where they then need to keep winning and collecting points through their victories in order to climb higher. Even among the fighters who manage to make it through all of those stages and reach this level, only the absolute best of the best among that already elite group are ever going to find themselves competing at this tier. The crowd is still going at Kwang Ho without letting up, throwing whatever they can and hurling curses at him from every direction, with people telling him to just accept that he has already lost and stop dragging it out. The fight continues with the opponent coming straight at Kwang Ho and loading up for a punch, but the moment the strike comes out the opponent immediately realizes that something has gone very wrong as his own fingers end up broken from the exchange before he can even process what happened. After that, Kwang Ho does not hesitate and launches himself forward, connecting with a high kick that comes completely out of nowhere as far as everyone watching is concerned, and the impact of it sends a wave of shock rippling through the entire audience who had not seen it coming at all. While Paul is still trying to gather himself and fire something back, Kwang Ho is already loading up and throws another kick directly into his face before he gets the chance. The audience immediately starts calling it another foul, but Kwang Ho just smiles at them with that devil-like grin of his and casually says that it was nothing more than an accident. He then continues to lay into Paul with a level of mercilessness that starts making the audience genuinely uncomfortable, and people begin yelling at him from the stands to stop and let up already. Kwang Ho turns to the crowd and responds by holding up his pinky finger in their direction, making it perfectly clear that their opinions mean absolutely nothing to him and he could not care less what they think. Paul is lying there injured and looks up at Kwang Ho, asking him why he has not gone ahead and finished it yet, telling him that at this point it does not matter whether it was a foul or outright cheating because the win belongs to Kwang Ho regardless of how he got there. Then out of nowhere, something shifts and Paul suddenly gets his full abilities back all at once, and he immediately pushes himself up and moves toward Kwang Ho, revealing that the reason he never went for the knockout earlier was because he wanted to see what Kwang Ho looked like when he was operating at his absolute full strength. Kwang Ho looks at him and tells him straight that he is way too full of himself going around saying things like that out loud. Kwang Ho then says that the reason he did not wrap things up early on his own end was simply because finishing it off too quickly and easily would have made the whole thing incredibly boring, and where is the fun in that? In non-championship matches, the third round is always the final one, and that means everything that happens in this round is going to determine who walks away with the win. For the very first time, the girl calls out Kwang Ho's name and tells him to go out there and give it absolutely everything he has got without holding anything back. Hearing that coming from her catches Kwang Ho genuinely off guard, and he looks over at her and says that he honestly thought she was about to launch into one of her preacher mode speeches again like she always does. The girl has a whole flood of things running through her head that she wants to say to him right now, but she knows deep down that none of it is going to make any real difference at this point in the match. So instead, she just starts screaming at him that she wants to know what his plan actually is and what he has been holding back this whole time. After that moment passes, Paul steps forward and extends his hand toward Kwang Ho, pointing out that the two of them never actually greeted each other properly before any of this started. Kwang Ho looks at the outstretched hand with suspicion and asks him why he is going for a handshake right now, wondering out loud whether this is some kind of trick to break his arm while his guard is down. After they go through with the handshake, both fighters make their way back to their starting positions, and with everything set the third and final round get officially underway. As it turns out, Paul Roney's ability is rooted in vibration, and by channeling and directing those vibrations at his opponent he is able to progressively numb their senses and strip away their ability to perceive and react to what is happening around them. Meanwhile, a guy wearing a suit is watching the match, thinks that a non-ability user is standing best against a DK League black member, which is amazing. Back to the match, Kwang Ho notices that his sense of touch has gone missing, and he is stuck in one place. However, when Paul tries to attack him, he grabs his arm saying at this level, he will somehow manage. Kwang Ho continues to kick him on his face while grabbing his arm tightly. Unexpectedly, Paul throws him in the air, and when he gets down, he punches him straight in the chest. Paul looks down at him and asks him how it feels to be completely betrayed by his own senses and left with nothing to rely on. Paul notices that Kwang Ho is not responding or saying anything back, so he turns to the referee and tells him to go ahead and announce his victory so they can get this wrapped up. Right at that moment, however, Kwang Ho starts trying to pull himself back up onto his feet as something clicks and he begins piecing together what actually happened to him. Paul tells him that the moment he experienced his ability firsthand, Kwang Ho's own senses recognized on some instinctive level who the stronger person in the room was, and that recognition is exactly what caused them to turn around and betray their weaker owner without any resistance. Kwang Ho then reaches up and grabs Paul by the neck and tries to drive a headbutt into him, but Paul reads it without any difficulty and simply punches him straight in the face before it can connect. Paul then tells him that it is a real shame but that the moment he activated Terminus, the outcome of this whole thing was already decided and sealed before Kwang Ho even had a chance to process what was happening to him. He explains further that vision, touch, and hearing are all just a matter of time, and that before long more and more of Kwang Ho's senses are going to stop listening to him and start obeying Paul instead. He also admits that winning in this particular way is not something he personally enjoys, but that it is not like he has the option of actually losing to someone as weak as the person standing in front of him. Paul then winds up and moves in to deliver the final blow that will end everything, but he catches a kick straight to the face out of nowhere, and a voice tells him that he is going to have to beat his own senses to get there first. 3 days earlier, the girl had sat down with Kwang Ho and pointed out that he already had a pretty solid chance of getting disqualified at some point anyway, so she asked him straight up what exactly he was planning to do about any of it. Kwang Ho then started rattling off all kinds of random things without much of a clear direction to any of it, and as she listened the girl found herself thinking that the way he talked so freely and all over the place like that might actually be its own form of mental training in some strange way. Snapping back to the present, the girl is standing there with her jaw practically on the floor as she watches Kwang Ho laughing like an absolute maniac, and the thought running through her head is that he actually went ahead and pulled it off somehow. The commentators are equally stunned and cannot hide it, going on about how they cannot believe that Kwang Ho has actually managed to crack Paul Roney's Terminus ability right there in front of everyone. The other commentator jumps in and starts breaking down what they think happened, explaining that it appears to have been the result of an extremely powerful shock to the head that unintentionally disrupted and cracked the ability that Paul had already delivered and embedded into Kwang Ho's brain. Paul himself then starts laughing and looks over at Kwang Ho, calling him flat out crazy and pointing out that no ordinary or regular shock would ever be enough to pull something like that off, and that attempting something like that is simply not something any person in their right mind would ever even consider trying in the first place. After that, Kwang Ho launches himself straight at Paul and starts throwing punch after punch directly at his face without letting up. He works through every kind of attack he has in his arsenal, mixing in heavy strikes immediately after light ones to keep Paul guessing, and even going for a submission attempt somewhere in the mix to keep things unpredictable. At this point, what remains is a technique that has been pushed and refined to a level that can only really be described as superhuman. Before Kwang Ho can get there and set it up properly, Paul brings both of his hands up and locks himself into a tight defensive position to cut off the angle. Kwang Ho then looks at him and points out that there is not a whole lot of time left in the third round, so rather than the two of them standing around burning through what little is left, they might as well find a way to bring things to a finish quickly and make it count. Kwang Ho then tells him to go ahead and drop that guard of his and come at him with Terminus one more time and give it another real shot. He lays out what he is proposing, telling Paul that he is going to throw Terminus at him while Kwang Ho will be coming back at him with his own killer move, and they can see whose lands first and whose lands harder. Then, completely in line with who Kwang Ho is as a person and the fact that he has never really carried the kind of pride that most fighters feel obligated to uphold, he uses the cover of that whole conversation as a distraction and launches an attack right in the middle of it, targeting Paul's already injured right eye with a calculated and deliberate strike while Paul is still in the middle of processing what was just said. Coming from a blind spot that Paul simply cannot see, Kwang Ho tricks him into thinking a high kick is coming by selling the setup convincingly, then changes the trajectory of the kick midway through and sends it somewhere completely different than where Paul was expecting it to land. It is a low and scrappy way to fight and nobody is going to call it pretty, but the reality is that this kind of deceptive and unpredictable approach is the only thing that is realistically going to work in Kwang Ho's favor against someone like Paul. Kwang Ho keeps right on going and continues hammering away at him, holding on to the belief that if he keeps applying relentless pressure and keeps hitting without letting up, something is eventually going to give and break through. In the very last second of the exchange, Paul lands a devastatingly powerful strike on Kwang Ho, and the reaction from everyone watching is immediate, with people calling out urgently for the medical team to get into the octagon as fast as they possibly can, because even a punch to the chin that gets partially blocked can carry enough force to be genuinely life-threatening. However, Paul steps in front of the medical team and physically stops them from entering the octagon, and the reason becomes clear as Kwang Ho is still standing and has somehow managed to withstand Paul's attack, having taken a direct and clean hit to the chin and staying on his feet through it. With only 20 seconds remaining on the clock, both fighters dig into whatever they have left and keep going at each other without backing down. They push through every last second until the final call to end the match is announced, and even in that very last moment both of them manage to throw one final punch at each other before it is all over. On their way back from everything, Kwang Ho tells the girl to swing by the rest area because he is starving and needs to eat something. The girl heads off to use the restroom, and when she comes back out and turns the corner she gets the shock of her life finding Kwang Ho completely unconscious and flat out on the ground. Later that night, the girl ends up having to carry Kwang Ho all the way back to his apartment on her back, and by the time she gets him there her spine is feeling like it has been put through the ringer from the effort of hauling him the whole way. As it turns out, the match has officially been recorded as concluded, and even though the result goes down as a decision loss for Kwang Ho, the fact that a black-tier top fighter failed to finish off a non-ability user through a knockout victory is the kind of outcome that has the potential to create a very significant and far-reaching issue within the league going forward. Back to the present, the girl sits with her thoughts and wonders whether people are genuinely still going to want to tune in and watch the next match, even knowing that at this point they do not really have any other choice but to move forward with it. She also opens up and admits to herself that she had not trusted him going into all of this, and that deep down she had been convinced that if things started going sideways and not according to plan, he would just walk away from the league and disappear without looking back. But sitting here now after watching today's match, she realizes that she spent the whole time watching from a safe and comfortable distance while he was out there in the middle of it all getting hurt, and that realization sits heavily with her. The girl then finds her thoughts wandering somewhere unexpected as she thinks about how a man will give absolutely everything he has for the woman he loves, and she finds herself quietly wondering whether Kwang Ho might actually have feelings for her. The following morning, the two of them order some food, and when it arrives Kwang Ho digs into it like a complete maniac who has not eaten in days. After they both finish eating, the girl pulls up an interview on her phone where a reporter is out on the street conducting interviews with members of the public, asking them how they perceived the fight between Kwang Ho and Paul the day before and what their overall takeaway from it was. As it turns out, the interview that follows does not go well at all as person after person lines up to express their absolute hatred toward Kwang Ho, with people saying he was nothing more than a loser the whole time and that someone like him deserves to be put behind bars. The girl moves quickly to shut the interview down before it gets any worse, but Kwang Ho reaches out and stops her from doing it. The reporter then steps back and gives his honest read on the situation, saying that the responses they are getting from the public are clearly not looking good and that it is pretty obvious the approach that was taken came across as way too aggressive, with a significant number of people walking away genuinely angry about the whole thing. Then the reporter does something unexpected and tosses his stuff aside before turning to the camera and saying that anyone who has been following and watching fighting sports for a long time already knows exactly what kind of fighter Kwang Ho really underneath is all of the noise and controversy surrounding him. The reporter then puts the question directly to the public and asks whether people want to see another fight from him, and the answer that comes back is that people have actually started to become a little bit interested and that there is a growing curiosity about how exactly he is going to manage to pull off a win the next time around. The moment Kwang Ho and the girl hear that response coming back from the public, the two of them completely lose their composure and start shouting with excitement, because that is exactly the kind of reaction they had been hoping and working toward this whole time. After that, Kwang Ho pulls up an article on his phone and shows her that they are currently sitting at the #1 trending spot, and tells her that showing people something real and compelling just once does a far better job than trying to promote something 100 times over through conventional means. He then tells her to look at the situation clearly because there is genuinely nothing to lose by trusting his instincts and following where he leads. The girl still finds herself struggling to wrap her head around the fact that a single match was enough to produce this kind of outcome and impact. She thinks to herself that this could very well just be a coincidence, and she is fully aware that the result they are looking at right now came together through a whole chain of coincidences lining up one after another in just the right way. However, she also thinks that being able to step forward and act with real confidence and conviction regardless of the uncertainty around you is an entirely different skill that not everyone possesses. As the two of them walk outside together, the girl finds herself thinking about just how remarkably gifted Kwang Ho really is, carrying a level of genius and a natural intuition that is genuinely hard to find in anyone. The provocations Kwang Ho has been throwing out have managed to leave a deep and lasting impression on the public that has gotten under people's skin in a way that is hard to shake, and the results he has achieved through that approach are nothing short of astonishing when she actually stops and looks at the numbers. A few days pass and the girl sits down to check on things, and what she finds is not encouraging as the traffic numbers are clearly on a downward slide and even their real-time search rankings have taken a noticeable hit, which leads her to the conclusion that they are missing something important that is needed to keep the momentum going. Out of nowhere she hears a loud and unpleasant noise coming from nearby, and when she looks over she finds that Kwang Ho is in the middle of blending together what can only be described as a truly disgusting-looking chicken breast shake like it is the most normal thing in the world. The girl immediately loses her patience and lets him have it for doing something that revolting right in front of her without a second thought. The frustration then bubbles over into something deeper as she breaks down and thinks to herself that there is genuinely nobody else in her life right now besides this one guy that she can actually put her trust in and rely on, which is both a comforting and a terrifying realization at the same time. Kwang Ho looks over at her and asks if she actually has a problem with something, because from where he is standing everything is moving along exactly according to the plan and there is nothing to panic about. Kwang Ho then steps in closer to her and points out that he already explained everything the last time they talked about it, and asks her why she is making such a big fuss about it all over again now. As it turns out, the problem is that she genuinely cannot remember what Kwang Ho had actually told her during that conversation, and the realization of that hits her and sends a wave of worry washing over her as she stands there trying to piece it back together. She starts debating with herself over whether she should just go ahead and ask him to explain it again, but then the thought creeps in that if she does, he is going to ask her what she was thinking about back when he originally told her, and she is not going to have any kind of acceptable answer ready for that question. She then catches herself and wonders why she is even letting something like this stress her out in the first place when there are bigger things to focus on. After splashing some cold water on her face and pulling herself together, she makes the decision to go find him and ask him about it, this time with her head held high and her confidence fully intact. She heads straight to the office and pushes the door open without hesitating, announcing right away that she needs him to walk her through the plan he had talked about before. What she finds on the other side of that door, however, stops her completely in her tracks, as she discovers Kwang Ho sitting alone in the office with another girl that she was not at all expecting to find there. The girl who is sitting in the office tells the other girl to go ahead and report what is happening because she is being threatened right there in that room. Upon hearing that, Kwang Ho's manager completely loses it and slaps him hard across the face, telling him that she had genuinely put her trust in him and this is what she gets for it. Kwang Ho then moves quickly and wraps his arm around her neck, locking it in and asking her why on earth she had to go and do that when everything was actually going so well up until that moment. After putting her to sleep, he carries her over and drops her onto the sofa before turning his attention back to the other girl, who looks at him and says that now that there is nobody left to get in the way and interrupt them, they should pick up right where they left off. The girl then gets to the point and tells Kwang Ho straight up that the DK League has absolutely no intention of putting another match on the schedule for him. Kwang Ho stops and asks her if he heard that correctly and then wants to know the reasoning behind a decision like that. The girl tells him that she is fully aware of what he is trying to do, and that his goal is to use a rematch to keep feeding the temporary wave of popularity that MMA has been riding and sustain the buzz that has been building around it. She then goes on to explain that the reasoning behind this whole situation actually works in his favor in a strange way, because the DK League wants, or more accurately needs, a rematch with him in order to repair and restore the reputation that took a hit from how things went down in their last encounter. Kwang Ho then tells her to arrange the match, but she says that it's not that simple. The girl says that he disrespected the black rank Paul Roney and this is not about the foul, the core issue is that he defiled the symbolism that black rank holds. However, Kwang Ho says that there might be some kind of misunderstanding because he never committed a foul as it was just accident. The girl then changes the topic and says that Kwang Ho's office is quite small except for the view, which is good. Kwang Ho replies that it's small because they destroyed their original place, but the girl asks him if this is also the inevitable fate of a weak league. Kwang Ho tells her that he has had enough of listening to what sounds like a whole lot of nonsense, and cuts straight to it by telling her to just get to the actual point of why she is here. He then moves in closer to her and says that if the stuff she has been talking about was really the main issue she needed to address, she would not have gone out of her way to come down here and say it to him in person, which tells him there is something more to it. The girl shifts uncomfortably under his gaze and stands up and then tells him that she actually has two pieces of good news to share with him. She starts explaining that while the actions Kwang Ho has committed are not something that can simply be swept under the rug and ignored, they have taken a close look at his overall performance and the kind of attention-grabbing gimmick he brings to the table, and have come to the conclusion that he is simply too valuable to just throw away and write off. Because of that, they have made the decision to go ahead and grant him a pro card. She then clarifies the terms by explaining that he is not going to be permitted to participate in the official DK League itself, but that he is fully eligible to compete in the lower pro leagues operating beneath it. Kwang Ho, however, does not even let her finish before he flat out refuses the offer without any hesitation, so the girl quickly adds that if he manages to rack up 3 points by winning matches in the lower pro league, that would make him eligible to step up and compete in the official DK League as well. Kwang Ho then asks her about the second good news, and she says that the previous match he all called to as an execution match, even the DK League is struggling with Paul's unilateral actions. She also reveals that she has taken all the blame and has been penalized, and the specific of the punishment is to assist Kwang Ho. She then says that she will join this sinking team. Before long, the lower pro division finals of the DK League arrive, and whoever manages to come out on top in this match is going to be one significant step closer to making their official debut in the DK League itself. Kwang Ho's opponent comes out acting completely unhinged, declaring loudly that he is going to defeat Kwang Ho no matter what it takes and that he is going to bring justice to the world in the process. He also goes on to say that all the popularity that came from stirring up the conflict between the ability user and non-ability user match was nothing more than a carefully constructed setup from the very beginning. As it turns out, Kwang Ho handles the whole thing without much trouble at all and takes the Dreamer guy down with relative ease, earning himself 1 more point in the process, which means he now only needs 2 more points to reach his goal. Kwang Ho stands there afterward and finds himself genuinely frustrated, wondering out loud why none of the more significant fights he has already been through count toward his total, pointing out that he has already gone up against a black rank fighter, so why exactly does he need to keep burning through his time and energy dealing with people who are complete nobodies in the grand scheme of things. Kwang Ho's manager then pulls him aside and tells him that he needs to at least take a proper break at this point, because no matter how straightforward the matches might seem to him, this is already his 5th fight in a row without any real rest in between. Kwang Ho, however, brushes that off completely and refuses to take any kind of break, saying that he has a record to set and that alone is enough reason to keep pushing forward, and that he is not stopping until he has made his point to the people who need to hear it. After that, Kwang Ho goes out and takes down 2 more opponents back to back, adding 2 more points to his total in the process. Kwang Ho then turns to the representative and tells her to go ahead and get the next match lined up and arranged as soon as possible, but his manager is standing there watching all of this and the concern on her face is impossible to miss, because she is fully aware that he is now sitting at 16 matches without having taken a single break anywhere in between. She then completely loses her patience and turns on him, demanding to know whether setting some record is really worth all of this when he has already gone through 16 fights, and telling him firmly that he needs to stop and give his body some time to recover before he does any more damage to himself. Despite taking all of that in and hearing every word she said, Kwang Ho simply turns back to the representative and tells her to set up the next match anyway. The representative then steps in and suggests to both of them that being undefeated or racking up a high number of knockout victories can actually serve as a really powerful and effective promotional tool on its own without needing much else to back it up. Running low on fresh ideas at this point, Kwang Ho's manager throws out the suggestion that they throw a party before the match as a way to generate some buzz, but Kwang Ho looks at her like she has completely lost her mind when he hears that come out of her mouth. Before he can just turn and walk away from the conversation entirely, she tells him that this is not really up for debate and that it is a request he needs to go along with, and after a moment Kwang Ho reluctantly agrees to it. The moment Kwang Ho is out the door and gone, Kwang Ho's manager turns her attention to the representative and asks her straight up what exactly she is doing here, making it clear that she finds it very difficult to just suddenly trust someone who was essentially on the opposing side not all that long ago. The manager grabs her by the collar and keeps pushing her to just come out and tell the truth about what she is really after, but instead of answering out loud the girl simply leans in and whispers something directly into the manager's ear. That same night, Paul makes his way over to meet with his CEO, who is clearly furious at him for not following the orders that were handed down to him. Paul responds by laughing it off and telling the CEO that the whole thing was such a dirty and underhanded strategy and suggests that if he wants things done a certain way he should try controlling him directly instead of passing orders down from above. Meanwhile, Kwang Ho is on his way back home after loading up on a bunch of snacks, completely unaware that a mysterious girl wearing a mask is trailing along behind him and following his every move. After that, the mysterious girl starts tailing Kwang Ho through a street that is completely empty and quiet with nobody else around. When she reaches into her pocket to try and pull something out, Kwang Ho moves on her instantly and closes the distance before she can react, ripping the mask right off her face so he can see who he is dealing with. Kwang Ho then looks her dead in the eyes and tells her that she has 3 seconds to answer 2 questions, which are who she is and who sent her to follow him, and he means it. The girl immediately gets flustered and starts trying to tell him that he has the whole situation completely wrong and that there is a misunderstanding, but Kwang Ho is already counting down without any intention of stopping. Sometime later, Kwang Ho finally makes it back and the girls are both visibly relieved but also clearly worried about the fact that he stayed out as late as he did. Kwang Ho's manager immediately moves toward him and starts checking him over, asking him if he is hurt anywhere or if anything happened to him, but Kwang Ho just looks at her and asks her why she is freaking out over it the way she is. He tries to brush past her and move her out of the way, but she plants herself and tells him that she has been doing some digging into the fighters who are going to be participating in the same league he is competing in, and what she found out is that the people involved are genuinely dangerous in a way that goes beyond what you would normally expect. Kwang Ho tries to downplay it and says that she might just be blowing things out of proportion, but the girl shakes her head and tells him that these people are the type who would not hesitate to do something outside of the match itself if it meant guaranteeing that they came out on top. Kwang Ho then says that he know what she were worried about, and asks if she think he haven't dealt with types like them before. He tells her not to worry about him, but the girl says that all the fighters participating in the next match belong to the same cult, and they are a powerful cult that worships power. Kwang Ho, who looks completely non-serious, asks her where did she get the information from. Earlier, the manager begged the representative that she wants to help Kwang Ho so she should tell her some insider information about the DK League. Back in present, the representative asks Kwang Ho if he saw anyone suspicious on his way here. Earlier, the girl that Kwang Ho caught following him told him that she came here to get a sign and it was a misunderstanding, but Kwang Ho still punched her hard in the face. Back in present, Kwang Ho tells them that they should get their party started and just not think about those idiots. Meanwhile, somewhere completely separate from everything else going on, a group of cult members are gathered together in a meeting when an old man turns to a bald guy sitting across from him and asks him directly why he has crossed over into their territory without any invitation or permission. The old man then gets up and moves in closer to him, telling him that he has been hearing all kinds of rumors about how this man and his group worship power, and that according to the core tenets of his own faith he himself embodies power in its truest form, which means the bald guy ought to be listening to what he has to say. The bald guy takes that in and tells him that it is true that they do worship power, and while they do not go around framing everything they do through a simple black and white lens of good versus evil, there is more to say on the matter. Before that conversation can go any further, however, the bald guy reaches up and shrugs his jacket off his shoulders and charges straight at the old man's companions without any further warning. He proceeds to work through each one of them with a level of mercilessness that leaves no room for any kind of comeback, taking them apart one by one while the old man stands back and watches, asking him whether he has any fear at all of divine punishment coming down on him for what he is doing. The bald guy then walks slowly and deliberately toward the old man, telling him that he can go ahead and pray to whatever god he chooses to follow, but that the only thing he should really be asking that god for right now is salvation. Meanwhile, Kwang Ho and the girls are in the middle of the party that was planned, but the one who is going the hardest on the drinks turns out to be the manager, who keeps reaching for more juice at a rate that has everyone a little surprised. The other girl looks over and wonders out loud whether she is drinking a bit too much, but Kwang Ho just shrugs and tells her to leave her alone and let her enjoy herself. The following morning, the manager drags herself awake and the very first thing she does before anything else is down a large amount of water to get herself feeling like a human being again. As she is coming back to her senses, she thinks about how it has genuinely been a long time since she last slept that deeply and that soundly, and she also notices that despite how much juice she put away the night before, she actually feels surprisingly decent all things considered. When she wanders over to the window and looks outside, the sight of a massive ocean staring back at her is enough to send a jolt of panic straight through her. Kwang Ho then appears and tells her that they went ahead and threw the party just like she had asked for, but the manager immediately turns on him and lets him know exactly how she feels about the fact that he moved her while she was completely asleep without asking or telling her anything. Kwang Ho tells her that he had already made it clear there was a match happening on this island in 7 days and that they needed to get there and start preparing well in advance, and that she should honestly be thanking him for making sure she was looked after throughout all of it. The manager is not remotely interested in hearing any of that reasoning though and just keeps shouting at Kwang Ho. She freaks out that she didn't even tell her brother that she was going on a business trip. She decides to leave but realizes that there are no boats leaving the island, and Kwang Ho tells her that she has no choice but to stay and participate with them. The representative says that she was also surprised, and it was Kwang Ho who planned everything on his own. She also says that she took care of the simple handover work for the manager, so all she has to do is just contact her family directly, and she should be all set. Eventually, the manager agrees to stay, saying there is no other choice. She also mentions that she is doing it if Kwang Ho agree to one condition. The manager tells him that his goal here is to set the fastest record and he don't care as long as he get his match, then they should get their match over and that's it. She also says that after they finish eating, they will return to the hotel and keep to themselves until it's time for the match, then head straight back. She also says that she will let this whole incident slide if he keep that promise, but Kwang Ho is curious whether it's because of that cult. The moment that comes out of his mouth, every single person sitting in the restaurant turns their heads and starts looking over in their direction, so the girl moves quickly and shushes him before the attention gets any worse than it already is. Kwang Ho then lowers his voice and explains that everyone around them in this place is just a tourist anyway, since the island is well known for its beautiful natural scenery and is nothing more than a popular tourist destination at the end of the day. Kwang Ho then lays out what the plan is, telling her that he is going to use the time here to train, that they are going to keep their heads down and stay out of the spotlight, and that once the match is done they are going to pack up and head straight back without any unnecessary detours. Kwang Ho then looks at her and asks her what era she thinks they are living in that she is sitting around worrying about something like that, pointing out that this is not some remote and isolated wilderness in the middle of nowhere, and that if anything does happen to go wrong he will be right there to protect her. That night, the manager steps out alone to get some fresh air down on the beach, and as she walks along, she finds her thoughts drifting to Kwang Ho in a way she does not entirely expect. After a little while, Kwang Ho also shows up on the beach and explains that his phone internet stopped working and he came out to see if he could get any kind of signal out here. Then without any warning at all, the ship sitting right out in front of them suddenly explodes in a massive blast, leaving both of them completely frozen in shock at what they are seeing. After that, Kwang Ho tells her to take cover inside as he is going to find out what's going on. Upon hearing that, the girl lashes out at him saying she already said that it was going to be dangerous. She also tells him that she is not going to just follow any orders anymore and he shouldn't dare to order her around either. It turns out, the most certain way to persuade someone is not by using logic, but by using power. The girl starts subduing him with her power, thinking that she should have done this from the start, and how it's her fault for trying to reason with words. In reality, the girl is the one who falls unconscious on the ground while Kwang Ho tries to tell her to come to her senses. When she finally wakes up, Kwang Ho tells her that she lunged at him out of nowhere so he had to knock her out. The representative tells the manager that she was probably influenced by some ability because ever since the explosion that just happened, everyone on the island has started fighting. She further explains that it seems to be some kind of hypnotic ability. To be able to use an ability of this scale is strange itself. However, Kwang Ho raises a point that does not quite add up for him, asking that if they were genuinely affected by some kind of ability, then why is it that the representative and he himself seem completely unaffected by whatever is happening around them? The representative thinks it through and tells them that there are two possible explanations for that, the first being that the ability user who activated this power is capable of intentionally selecting their targets and controlling exactly how far and wide the ability spreads, and the second possibility being that this has something to do with Paul Roney's terminus. Kwang Ho then turns to his manager and asks her if what the representative is saying lines up with what she knows, and the manager confirms it, explaining that this is simply the nature of what Black Tier represents, as it sits at the absolute top of all abilities and operates on a level that everything else below it cannot match. Out of nowhere, a guy suddenly launches himself at the group, but Kwang Ho reads it in time and drives a kick into him that sends him flying before he can do any damage. Right after that, a whole crowd of other civilians who have been turned into something resembling zombies starts shambling and moving toward the group from multiple directions at once. Kwang Ho immediately makes the call and takes off running, telling the others that they are going to have to find their own way out of this and escape on their own however they can. The girls do not need to be told twice and take off running as fast as their legs will carry them while the zombies give chase right behind them. While they are all running for their lives, the manager yells out at Kwang Ho and reminds him furiously that he had promised he would protect her if anything happened, and yet here they are with her running for her life while he does his own thing. The manager then suddenly stops and starts vomiting because her body has completely hit its limit and cannot keep up with the pace anymore, and the others immediately get worried about her and slow down to check on her. The representative tells her urgently that she needs to pull herself together and get back on her feet right now because the zombies have almost completely closed the gap and are right on their heels. Kwang Ho then comes back and scoops the manager up, noting that the zombies are being incredibly persistent and are not giving up on following them no matter what. The manager looks up at him and tells him through her exhaustion that he had deliberately left her behind back there, and that showing up now to help her is way too little and way too late. After that, Kwang Ho makes a quick decision and launches her through the entrance of a nearby building to get her out of immediate danger, while he himself turns around and starts sizing up the situation with the intention of taking the fight directly to the zombies. The representative steps up beside him and points out that the people in front of them are just regular civilians who have had an ability forced onto them against their will, and asks him whether he genuinely thinks he can take all of them down without causing serious harm to any of them. Kwang Ho, however, looks at the crowd closing in on them and says that running away is simply no longer a realistic option at this point, and that as it happens he has just come up with a pretty great idea for how to handle things. With that, he reaches down and pulls his shirt off completely before turning and charging headfirst straight at the monsters. After defeating all of them, Kwang Ho falls on the ground as he is too tired. The representative gets mad at him, asking if he is out of his mind because the people he just fought are civilians. Kwang Ho then starts going crazy over how those opponents manipulate him into doing something like this, and he will have to receive psychological damages because of them. After that, they quickly get back to the hotel room where they put the manager on bed. Kwang Ho watched the zombies from the balcony, saying that those guys are up again, and now that they are gone, they are fighting amongst themselves. The representative asks him if he predicted all this, but Kwang Ho asks her how anyone could predict this when it seems like those freaky cult weirdos are behind this. The representative says that they need to find out why they started this in the first place, but Kwang Ho asks her why they are getting involved in this, and if they just lay low, someone's bound to come to rescue them. Kwang Ho then checks the refrigerator to check if they have enough supplies, and turns out they do. Before long, the manager comes back around and opens her eyes, and the first thing out of her mouth is asking him how exactly they are planning to deal with the fallout from what just happened, pointing out that he just went ahead and assaulted a bunch of ordinary people. She also says that nobody out there is going to buy the story that these people were affected by some kind of ability, and that if he wants any hope of justifying what he did, they are going to have to sort this whole mess out themselves before anyone else gets involved. Kwang Ho tells her that there is no real benefit to sitting around and waiting it out any longer than necessary, because whether it is the DK League or someone else entirely, whoever is responsible for keeping tabs on things is going to pick up on the fact that something has gone seriously wrong out here and is going to dispatch a rescue team to the island. The representative backs that up and also tells Kwang Ho that handling all of this is not actually their responsibility to begin with, and that if they just stay put and wait it out, the DK League's rescue team is going to show up and take over. Kwang Ho thinks about that for a moment and figures that sounds like a reasonable outcome, but the girl then drops something on him that changes the picture entirely, revealing that if that is what ends up happening, they are going to go ahead and cancel the match. The representative adds on top of that given everything going on around them right now, there is simply no way the match can proceed under these circumstances anyway, and she also points out that this means his record for the shortest time is gone as well. Kwang Ho then reveals that he had the same intention from the start, as he can't pretend not to notice when the people are in crisis. After everything settles for a moment, the manager tells them that in order to actually solve what is happening here, they need to figure out two things, which are why whoever did this chose to do it in the first place and where exactly the person casting the ability is located right now. Kwang Ho then tells everyone to put their brains to work on the thinking side of things, because he is going to personally take care of all the physical stuff that needs to be handled on the ground. The representative points out that right now they are working with far too little information to make any real progress, and that without more to go on there is simply no reliable way for them to figure out what they need to know. The manager then throws out the suggestion that they grab one of the cult members and extract the information they need directly from them, which at least gives them a starting point. Kwang Ho, however, shoots that approach down pretty quickly, saying that it takes way too long and that he is already feeling the urgency of wanting to get in there and start helping people as fast as he possibly can rather than sitting around waiting for information to trickle in. The manager then tries a different angle and asks Kwang Ho to think about it from the other side, asking him that if he were the mastermind sitting behind this whole incident, what would his reasoning be for doing something like this in the first place? The manager thinks it over herself at the same time and comes to the conclusion that trying to predict the motivations and next moves of a cult that is built entirely around the worship of power is probably an exercise in futility, because their logic simply does not follow any normal or predictable pattern. She then thinks out loud that if they happen to have someone among them who thinks in a similar way to whoever is behind all of this, then they might actually be able to get ahead of them and anticipate what their next move is going to be before it happens. The representative picks up on that thread and works through it, saying that this is a cult that worships power and manipulates people around them as a means of achieving whatever they are after, but that if they flip that thinking completely on its head, it is possible that making people fight each other was never just a method for them but was actually the goal itself all along. She also adds that the simplest explanation for why they are doing any of this might just be that they want to show off and flaunt their power in front of as many people as possible, and the manager thinks about that and comes to the unsettling conclusion that if that is actually the case, then there is really no clear way to put a stop to it because there is no endgame to target. She thinks further and says that what they really need is to understand what this group is ultimately trying to accomplish so that they can either use that knowledge to lure them out into the open or find a way to shut the whole thing down at its source. Kwang Ho then cuts in and tells them that he actually knows a way to draw them out and get them to show themselves. The following morning, all three of them pile into a car that they helped themselves to from a nearby parking lot and hit the road. The manager gets behind the wheel and drives so aggressively and recklessly that Kwang Ho nearly gets thrown right out of the car at one point, and she freaks out herself, admitting that this is the first time she has ever had to drive something this large and she is very much figuring it out as she goes. Kwang Ho then says that he already knew these zombies are going to stop fighting each other and rush at them like crazy the moment they see them. Kwang Ho then feels relieved because by drawing their attention like that they won't fight among themselves, and no one will get hurt anymore, then those cult guys won't find it fun anymore. Kwang Ho then tells the girls that he is going to jump from here, so they should run straight back to the hotel. Before jumping, he also mentions that if he doesn't come back, they should make a hole in that hotel and never come out. Afterward, the manager presses the car brake even though Kwang Ho told her not to stop, and he goes to crash on another guy in front of them. At that moment, all the zombies surround their car. After that, the zombies shift their attention and start going after some of the men who are just walking down the street minding their own business. The representative reaches down and grips something in her hand that Paul had given her before all of this started. He had told her that if she ever pressed that buzzer, no matter where she happened to be at the time, he would come and get her out of the situation, but that it only works 3 times and after the 3rd use she is on her own completely. Later on, Kwang Ho opens his eyes and finds himself sitting inside a prison cell, and the first thing he sees when he looks around is a creepy-looking guy standing there staring directly at him, who tells him that the cult leader is waiting and wants to see him. Kwang Ho, however, does not pay any attention to that and just sits there, which immediately gets under the guy's skin as he stiffens up and makes it crystal clear that disobeying is not an option and that if Kwang Ho refuses to follow along he is going to kill him right then and there. After that threat lands, Kwang Ho gets up and follows the men down the corridor, and as they walk he casually asks them why they have not bothered to put any cuffs or restraints on him considering the situation. The guy tells him plainly that there is no need for any of that because they already have a hostage and that is more than enough to keep him in line. Kwang Ho then throws back the question of what would happen if he decided to just grab the guy walking beside him and use him as a hostage instead, and the guy does not even flinch before responding that a hostage only has any real value if the person holding them actually has something worth negotiating for. When they finally make it to the leader's room and Kwang Ho is brought inside, he looks around and asks straight up what exactly he is doing here and what this is all about. The leader looks at him with genuine curiosity and comments that he does not seem to be showing even the slightest hint of fear given the situation he is currently in, but Kwang Ho just shrugs and says that since they already have the hostage there is no opening he can see for him to make any kind of escape, so there is not much point in panicking about it. The cult leader then offers up what sounds like a philosophical observation, telling him that fear comes from uncertainty and doubt, but that when someone has a deep and unshakable faith in their own power that goes beyond simple belief, fear simply has no place to take root and cannot be felt at all. Kwang Ho then shifts his gaze and spots both of the girls tied up on the other side of the room being held as hostages, but before he can process that fully the cult leader steps in close to Kwang Ho and lowers his voice to a whisper, telling him that the girls are sinners who have failed to even follow through on their own desires and that this failure is exactly the reason he intends to punish them for it. Kwang Ho then looks back at him and asks what his plans are when it comes to him specifically, and the cult leader tells him without any hesitation that he is considered innocent in all of this and is therefore free to walk out the door and go wherever he pleases. Hearing that, Kwang Ho gets surprised and asks him why he abducted him in the first place. The cult leader replies that if he wants to save the girls then it is right to test whose intentions are truly right, which means that he has to fight with him. Unexpectedly, Kwang Ho just turns around and leaves. He continues walking outside the mansion until it's almost edge of the cliff. Later, the girls are in the cell as well and realize that there's no way for them to escape easily. The representative notices the manager sitting in the corner looking all depressed, so she sits beside her. She tells the manager that the structure is designed so that it can never be opened from the inside unless someone comes to save them. Hearing that, the manager starts sobbing because she misses Kwang Ho. The manager is sad because she thinks that Kwang Ho must be dead by now, but the representative tells her not to blame herself too much as it was just an accident. Suddenly, the strange old geezer from before starts laughing as he is also in the same cell as the girls. He asks the girls what sins they committed to end up in this living hell. The representative has no idea what he is talking about, so he says that if this isn't hell, then what place would she call hell? The old man then says that he knows enough about this place since he has been in this place for a few days already. He then charges at the representative, saying once he deals with them, he got something else to do. The old men then crash into the girl, who then kicks right at his lifeline. After that, she beats him up even more and says that she can't tell whether this is his good or bad luck, but pain isn't his thing. The girl then caught him and says that her ability is to pass through soft materials like clothes or skin, and says that if he provides the information about this place, she won't use her ability. However, the old man suddenly starts puffing himself up and acting like he is some kind of tough guy, so the representative responds by pressing a single finger into just the right spot and giving him a very quick and very convincing introduction to what real pain feels like. The representative then takes a step back and thinks through her approach, coming to the conclusion that this guy is really just a massive scaredy cat underneath all the posturing, and that trying to persuade him is probably going to get her a lot further than continuing to threaten him. She then softens her tone and tells him that she genuinely does not want to have to keep doing this to him, and that if he is willing to work with her and cooperate, she will make sure the two of them both get out of this place safely together. The old man looks at her skeptically and asks her how on earth she expects him to put any trust in something as flimsy as a verbal promise, pointing out that the moment he gives her the information she is looking for, she is just going to take off and leave him behind without a second thought. The representative looks him over and tells him that he is coming across as pretty suspicious, and that at this rate just forcing the truth out of his mouth might honestly turn out to be the more efficient option. That seems to shift something in the old man, and he quickly tells her that if she can get him out of this place in one piece and keep him safe in the process, he will hand over 1 billion to her as payment. After going back and forth on it, the two of them shake on a deal, and the information he shares is that this religion operates under the belief that failing to use one's power is considered a sin, and that as a result of that belief the cult either works to redeem those who have sinned in their eyes, or they hand down punishment to those they decide cannot be saved. On the other side of things, anyone who is considered a sinner but has no power to speak of is thrown into a completely different situation where they are forced to keep fighting until they die, as the cult locks multiple prisoners together in a single room and strips away any access to food or water to make them turn on each other out of desperation. The old man then looks at the setup and remarks that what they are essentially enforcing here is a brutal and deliberate form of isolation designed to break people down. Out of nowhere, the representative suddenly lunges at him and tries to kick him, calling him out and saying that there is absolutely no way he stumbled across all of this information and managed to survive in this place for several days without something being off about his story. The old man then calmly points out that his small and compact size actually works in his favor because it means he can slip through the gaps in the cell bars with relative ease, go out and gather whatever information he needs, and then come back without anyone being the wiser. The representative is still not buying any of it and pushes back further, saying that if what he is telling them is actually true, then he would have just used that same ability to get himself out of this place a long time ago instead of sticking around. The old man, however, has an answer ready for that too, explaining that the exit leading to the outside is completely blocked off, and that his plan was to stay put in the prison for now, find someone weaker than him to beat in a fight, and then when a guard came to move prisoners to another room, he was going to use money to bribe his way into a better position. Before anyone can respond to any of that, Paul suddenly appears out of nowhere and tears the prison bars apart with his bare hands, leaving the representative completely stunned by the sight of it. It turns out, the girl mistakenly pressed the buzzer. She quickly takes it out and tries to tell Paul that she didn't press it. Paul then says that he made a huge mistake to think he tried to win her heart with something like this. Paul then smashes the buzzer from his bare hand, and from inside an engagement ring falls that he wanted to give to this girl. However, Paul then punches the ring and destroys it. The representative then tries to kick Paul because he put a ring in that. At the same time, the manager is still crying for Kwang Ho and repeatedly apologizes, thinking that it's all her fault. After that, Paul manages to get them free and leads the way while a bunch of people nearby sits on their knees as if they are praying. The representative asks Paul how exactly he got here because she never pressed the button. Before Paul even gets a chance to explain himself, the girl cuts him off and tells him straight that she does not want to hear any of it. She then proceeds to friend-zone him right then and there, thanking him for coming to her rescue and telling him that he is a really dependable colleague to have around, and leaving it at exactly that. Paul stands there and thinks to himself that he genuinely gave it everything he had, but it is becoming pretty clear that his feelings are just not getting through to her no matter what he does. Kwang Ho's manager then turns to Paul and tells him that while they have not exactly spent a whole lot of time together, she has picked up quite a bit about that woman just from being around her. She also mentions that the two of them have even had conversations about their ideal types at some point, which gets Paul's attention immediately as he asks her what exactly it is that she wants from him in exchange for that information. The manager tells him that she is not asking for anything too crazy and that for someone like him it might actually be a pretty straightforward thing to pull off. She tells him that what she needs is for him to go and retrieve Kwang Ho's body, and Paul stops her right there and asks her if she is saying that Kwang Ho is actually dead. Paul then tells her that he is going to need to hear a whole lot more detail before he does anything else. The manager then decides to sweeten the deal even further and tells him that from what she has been picking up on lately, the girl he has feelings for has recently started showing some interest in a particular man. After that, Paul activates his ability and tells everyone standing around him to go back and inform their leader that he is not moving from this spot until he finds Kwang Ho's body, and he means every word of it. Meanwhile, on a completely different side of things, Kwang Ho appears to have somehow inserted himself into the cult and is already getting into a heated argument with Preacher from before. Kwang Ho is pushing to become part of the missionary group within the cult, and Preacher is absolutely furious at the audacity of that request given the fact that Kwang Ho does not even have any kind of ability to speak of. Kwang Ho then leans in and tells him casually that his actual plan is to chew this entire cult up and spit it back out, so there is really no need to worry about scheduling any kind of match because he is going to be setting records before anyone even realizes what is happening. He also makes it clear that the reason he is being so upfront about all of this is because he is confident that Preacher in front of him is going to be next on his list when the time comes. That pushes Preacher completely over the edge and his fury reaches a whole new level. Right at that tense moment, another guy comes bursting in and announces that there is serious trouble brewing and that he needs to see the cult leader immediately. Preacher tells him that the leader is in the middle of praying and cannot be disturbed, so he should bring whatever it is directly to him instead. The guy then raises his voice and shouts out that Paul Roney is currently tearing through and destroying the entire facility piece by piece. Kwang Ho takes that in and says out loud that it sounds like Paul is here to save them, but before he can say anything else the black-haired guy winds up and charges straight at Kwang Ho with a punch. After eating the punch, Kwang Ho gets pushed back from the impact, and Preacher immediately follows it up by launching into a kick aimed straight at him. Kwang Ho manages to get his guard up in time and blocks it, then tries to fire something back at the guy, but Preacher reads it and slips out of the way without much trouble. Kwang Ho thinks to himself that he is not entirely sure what is going on with all of this, but that it actually works out pretty well for him because his plan is to beat this guy right here and then move straight on to the cult leader after that. Preacher then turns and calls out to his people, telling them to get every door in the place locked down tight so that Kwang Ho has no easy way out of the situation if he tries to make a run for it. Kwang Ho then tries a completely different approach and asks Preacher whether it might just make more sense for them to sit down and talk this through like reasonable people, pointing out that instead of wasting energy fighting each other they should really be thinking about joining forces to deal with Paul Roney together. Preacher however is not interested in hearing a single word of that and comes at Kwang Ho again without even pausing to consider what was just said, but Kwang Ho shifts out of the way and lets the attack go right past him. Kwang Ho then sends a kick back at him, but even with his back turned Preacher somehow manages to dodge it cleanly like he already knew it was coming. He also thinks to himself that what he is seeing from this guy is not just some simple enhancement of his natural reflexes, but that it comes across as something closer to actual clairvoyance the way he is reading and reacting to everything. Kwang Ho then grabs a glass and hurls it at him, saying out loud that the guy is not even all that impressive when it comes to raw strength, and that judging purely by the look in his eyes it is pretty clear that he is working with some kind of special ability underneath everything. Kwang Ho then starts trying to narrow it down and asks him whether it is some kind of danger sensing or detection ability, and follows that up by suggesting that it looks like there might be a limited number of times he can actually use it before it runs out. Preacher then makes his move and activates what he calls his sacrifice ability, and turns to one of his people and tells them to go let Paul know that they will be delivering Kwang Ho's dead body to him shortly. Back at the facility at the same time, the fellow men approach Paul and try to tell him that Kwang Ho's dead body is on its way and that he should go ahead and stop using his ability since there is no longer any reason to keep tearing the place apart. Meanwhile, Kwang Ho completely ignores Preacher and starts working his way through all of the fellow men surrounding him first, beating them down one by one, which sends Preacher into a fury as he demands to know why Kwang Ho is not stepping up and choosing to fight him directly instead. He then takes matters into his own hands and charges straight at Kwang Ho, wondering out loud why he keeps avoiding the fight between the two of them. As it turns out, Preacher's ability is something called infinite potential, and what it does is allow him to see the infinite range of possible futures stretching out in front of him and identify the specific path that leads to victory from among all of them. However, in order to keep the strain on his brain from becoming completely overwhelming, he selectively filters what he perceives and only picks up on the possibilities that represent a direct and immediate threat to him personally. The problem in this particular situation is that his brain simply does not register what Kwang Ho is doing as a direct threat to him, which is why the ability is not triggering the way it normally would. He thinks to himself that what is happening right now does not even qualify as a real fight in his mind, because a real fight by definition is when both sides are bringing their full strength against each other and neither one is holding back. Kwang Ho meanwhile works his way through the last of the fellow men and finishes taking all of them down, and then says out loud that once he gets his hands on the girl it is all but guaranteed that his victory is locked in. He then turns to Preacher and extends what he calls a final offer, telling him plainly not to follow him and not to bother chasing after him when he has made it clear he has no interest in settling things between the two of them right now. He also tells him that there is no reason to burn his energy on him, and that without all these guys backing him up he is simply not the same threat he would otherwise be. To Kwang Ho's complete surprise however, Preacher ignores every word of that and takes off chasing after him anyway. 1 year before all of this, Preacher and his friends are gathered together celebrating a birthday, and one of Preacher's friends starts giving him a hard time and making fun of him for getting all nervous and fidgety around the girl. The girl looks around and says that she had expected this cult to feel a lot more terrifying and intimidating than it actually does, but that there seemed to be a surprising number of genuinely good people here when she actually looks around and pays attention. She then says that Preacher in particular is someone she has taken a real liking to, and that she is curious about how exactly he ended up joining the cult in the first place and what his story is. She tells him that she wants to understand what kind of life he was living before all of this, but Preacher tells her that things like that do not really matter in this place and that people leave that stuff behind when they come here. The girl however pushes back and says that those things do matter, and that the reason they matter is directly tied to her ability, which is the power to enhance someone else's strength by learning and understanding their personal story and history. Preacher then tells her that according to the doctrine they follow here, leaning on or relying on the strength of someone else is considered a sin, and that since she is still new to this place she might not be fully aware of how seriously that is taken. He also warns her that the kind of statement she just made could get her executed if it reached the wrong ears, so she needs to be very careful about what she says and to whom she says it. The girl just looks back at him with a smile and asks him whether he is genuinely sitting here worrying about someone as seemingly small and weak as her. Preacher got captivated by that smile, and tells her that he used to be a boxer but 5 years ago, after his ability manifested, he gave up everything. He also says that if only he had his ability back then the things would have been different. With that, Preacher told her everything about his past, like how the cult leader gave him the ability and power, and so, he pledged his loyalty to the cult leader. He also says that it's okay for him to rely on others a little. That night, the cult leader asked him if he is relying on others and says that it must be a joke. The following day, Preacher tells his friends about it and says that he will take all the responsibility, so they should leave the cult and escape. However, Preacher's friend decides to take the responsibility together because this is the path they chose for themselves. Preacher then snaps back to reality and tells all of them flat out that every single one of them is expelled for blasphemy and that there is nothing more to discuss about it. Preacher's friends however are not about to just accept that lying down and decide that the only way to settle this is through a fight, and the three of them get into it and keep going at each other. Eventually the whole thing runs its course and comes to an end, and all of them walk away from it as if the whole thing was just a normal Tuesday and nothing particularly significant happened. Preacher then looks at them and tells them straight that their attacks never even came close to registering as a real threat to him, and that the gap in skill between them and him is honestly enormous. He also adds that they are so far below the level required to be here that it genuinely baffles him how any of them managed to get in the first place. Preacher then shifts his attention and walks over to the girl, telling her that he needs her help because the better she understands and knows the details of someone's life and story, the stronger and more powerful she is able to make their ability grow. He then lays out his plan to her, telling her that starting from today he is going to stay by her side at all times under the pretense of simply using her ability, and that when the right moment finally arrives the two of them are going to bring the cult leader down together. The moment those words land, the girl does not hesitate for even a second and throws her arms around him in a tight hug. Snapping back to the present, Kwang Ho has grabbed the girl and is holding her as a hostage, and turns to Preacher and tells him not to take even a single step closer. After that, Preacher tells him to calm down and stay steady, saying that he is not going to move from where he is standing, so the two of them should just talk this out and negotiate. Kwang Ho however does not even let him finish and drives a punch straight into his face, telling him that there is absolutely nothing to negotiate about because he has already seen what Preacher's ability can do and he is not about to fall for the same trick a second time around. Kwang Ho then points out that the moment he lets go of the hostage, Preacher is going to activate his ability and use it against him, and Preacher stands there looking at him and genuinely wonders out loud whether this guy is actually a normal human being or something else entirely. Kwang Ho then shifts the conversation and asks him straight up why Paul wants him dead and what the reason behind it is, but Preacher tells him honestly that he has absolutely no idea what Paul's motivation is or where it is coming from. Kwang Ho then tightens his grip on the girl by her hair and tells them both that he is going to go straight to the cult leader because as far as he can tell that is the only realistic path he has to getting out of this situation alive. As the three of them make their way there, Preacher walks alongside him and asks Kwang Ho what exactly his plan is once they get in front of the cult leader, and Kwang Ho tells him plainly that he is going to ask the cult leader to deal with Paul Roney and get him out of the picture. Preacher however thinks through what Kwang Ho is suggesting and immediately sees how unrealistic it is, asking him whether he genuinely believes the cult leader is the kind of person who goes around granting other people's wishes and desires just because someone shows up and asks. Kwang Ho tells him that figuring out how to make the persuasion work is his own problem to deal with, and that what he needs to do is find a way to convince the cult leader to take Paul out of the equation entirely, and that if he fails to do that then Kwang Ho is going to go straight to the leader himself and report everything he knows about Preacher's heretical actions. Preacher then tells him to hold on for a second and says that there has to be a better way to handle this through conversation rather than going down this road and suggests that the two of them put aside everything else and join forces to take Paul down together instead. Kwang Ho however still does not trust a single word coming out of his mouth, and Preacher keeps pushing and pleading with him to just have a little faith and trust him, repeating that trying to persuade the cult leader is simply not going to work and that this whole plan is heading toward disaster. Preacher then suddenly tells him to stop moving forward and says that he cannot go any further because the space ahead of them is the cult leader's personal sanctuary and entering it without permission is not something that is done lightly. The girl also turns to Kwang Ho and tells him urgently that he absolutely must not go in there and that it is still not too late for him to turn around and walk away from this before something irreversible happens, but Kwang Ho reaches over and grabs her by the neck and makes it clear that she is back to being a hostage whether she likes it or not. He tells Preacher to use his ability and if he don't follow his orders he will kill the girl. Kwang Ho then tells him that in 5 seconds from now, he will open this door and go in, so he should persuade the cult leader. Preacher again and again tells him that the cult leader is not going to grant another person's desires but Kwang Ho tells him to keep trying until it works. After that, Preacher uses his ability and gets succeeded, and tells Kwang Ho that they can go inside. Preacher then reveals that the persuasion failed and what he succeeded in was bringing about the worst possible future for him. It turns out, he brought Paul here who thinks that Kwang Ho has betrayed him. Preacher then gets furious Oswell thinking that this future was a great threat to him that he could foresee but he no longer care what happens to him. Kwang Ho then takes off his jacket and tells Paul Roney that they are a team now. Kwang Ho then turns to Paul and asks him if he has any grasp of the situation they are all currently stuck in, but Paul does not even bother engaging with the question and simply activates his special ability without a word. The moment that happens, Preacher takes off running as fast as his legs will carry him to get as far away from that spot as possible, and Kwang Ho sees him bolt and immediately follows right behind him, sensing that whatever is about to happen is not going to be good for anyone still standing nearby. The situation then plays out and the match kicks off with both Paul and the cult leader directing all of their focus and attacks exclusively toward Kwang Ho, and it turns out that this is exactly the future that Preacher had already seen coming. He tells Kwang Ho straight that the way he sees it, Kwang Ho is going to die at the hands of both the cult leader and Paul Roney before this is all over. Kwang Ho however looks around at the two of them and points out that neither one of them actually seems to be paying him any real attention at the moment, because they are completely wrapped up in going at each other and have temporarily forgotten he even exists. Paul comes out swinging right from the very start and manages to land some seriously solid hits on the cult leader using his terminus technique, putting him on the back foot almost immediately. Paul thinks to himself that this is what the absolute peak of an ability looks like in action, and that this is the true symbol of who Paul Roney is as a fighter. As it turns out, once the terminus ability gets fully activated, everything in its path simply ends, and every single person gathered in that space has no choice but to focus all of their efforts on preventing the terminus from reaching full activation until it can somehow be shattered and broken apart before it seals everything. Paul then tells the cult leader that among DK's black, none have shattered his terminus and asks the cult leader what ability he used. The cult leader says that terminus is a cowardly technique that avoids direct confrontation and those who don't trust their own strength collapse easily. Upon hearing that, Paul charges at the leader and punches him straight in the face saying that if it's a direct confrontation he is going to give it. After that, the cult leader shouts that he enjoys that and tries to wrap around Paul, but he smashes him on the ground saying it will only prolong unnecessary pain. In the meantime, Kwang Ho is fighting with Preacher saying he lied because his ability is to foresee his own danger. He also asks him how did he see his death, and says that even if he see his death, there's be no reason for him to say that. Just then, Paul charges at Kwang Ho and says that he always wanted to fight him again in the arena. Kwang Ho then throws him towards the cult leader and stands beside the preacher. Preacher then turns to Paul and brings up the fact that since Paul has always been after Kwang Ho's body, he wants to put a deal on the table for him to consider. Paul shuts it down immediately and says he has zero interest in any kind of deal, but Preacher keeps going and tells him that he has the ability to see how the tide of the battle is going to shift, and that kind of information is going to be genuinely useful to him whether he wants to admit it or not. Preacher also acknowledges that Paul has no reason to trust him, which is exactly why he is going to hand over some information up front before asking for anything in return. He then explains that what the cult leader is currently doing is deliberately allowing every single attack to land on him on purpose, because he is slowly and methodically building up his strength in the background, doing all of this simply because he wants to draw the fight out longer and enjoy it more. Paul finds that hard to process and looks confused by the explanation, but Preacher breaks it down further and tells him that it is an incredibly arrogant thing to do, and that the only reason the cult leader can get away with pulling something like that is because his belief in his own strength is so absolute that he sees no risk in it whatsoever. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Kwang Ho keeps right on going and continues laying into the cult leader without letting up. Preacher then moves on to the second thing he wanted to say, which is that Paul has absolutely no real intention of going through with any deal he might agree to right now. Paul then launches at him in response, and Preacher tells him straight that the reason he needs any of this to work out is because the future he is trying to create requires him to have access to the Terminus ability. After that, Preacher turns to Paul and tells him to get himself ready because the cult leader's powers are coming back online and they need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Before the cult leader can make any kind of move, however, Kwang Ho drives a kick straight into his face and then calls out to the others asking them what exactly they are standing around waiting for and why they are leaving everything to him. Kwang Ho then tries to follow up with an elbow strike aimed at him, but the cult leader simply vanishes before it can connect. The cult leader then reappears and catches the elbow strike with a block, telling Kwang Ho that he has gotten faster since the last time but that it still falls short of what would actually be needed to stop him. Meanwhile, the old man is over with the faculty people telling them that he effectively bought Paul with money, and makes the point that the power they have dedicated their entire belief system to worshipping has ultimately been reduced to nothing more than a tool that can be purchased with enough cash. He also brings up the fact that now that Paul is no longer a factor, nobody really knows what the remaining cult members are going to decide to do next, which creates a whole new problem to deal with. He then says that what he wants to do is bring them over and convert them into his own followers, framing the whole thing as some kind of missionary outreach effort on his part. The representative listens to all of that and thinks to herself that while it is actually somewhat helpful in a strange way, it is definitely not what anyone would consider a normal approach to the situation. She then shifts her gaze over to the manager and finds herself wondering quietly what is going through her head right now. The manager then tells her that since she was young she has been taking care of her younger brother alone, and she was young too, but her brother was even younger. Sadly, they had no one to rely on but her. The representative tells her to stop dancing around it and just say clearly what she is actually talking about, and the manager takes a breath and explains that it was the first time in a long time that she found someone she could genuinely lean on and share the weight of responsibility with without feeling like she was carrying everything alone. As she says it out loud, the realization hits the manager like a ton of bricks that the person she has actually developed feelings for is Kwang Ho himself. The manager then turns to the girl and asks her if she knows where Paul Roney went, and then answers her own question by saying that he went off to find Kwang Ho's body because she had asked him to go and do that. The girl, however, raises an eyebrow and says that Paul is simply not the type of person who goes around doing favors for people, and wants to know how on earth the manager managed to get through to someone like him and convince him to go along with it. At the exact same time, Preacher's friends are also sprinting away from the area as fast as they possibly can, and one of them calls out in disbelief saying that Preacher has somehow managed to recharge his ability all over again. The blonde-haired guy then shouts out that Preacher is currently holding his own in a fight against both Paul and the cult leader simultaneously, which is something nobody expected to be possible. They also all come to the same conclusion as they run, which is that every single thing spiraling out of control right now is ultimately happening because of Kwang Ho. The manager and the girl overhear that, and the manager gets excited to hear that Kwang Ho is actually alive. The representative gets frustrated thinking that she don't know the exact situation, but it looks like all the key figures have gone there. She then picks up the old men saying it's time for them to escape because she wants to get the 1 billion that he promised to her. She says that she will take the money and quit because she is tired of her job. She then asks the manager why she isn't following her, and says that if Kwang Ho is alive, nothing is holding them back anymore. The representative wants to protect the manager as part of her job until she quit. The representative then tells her that she is nothing but useless as she can't do anything except for running her mouth, so she should follow her. However, the manager starts walking saying she is going to Kwang Ho. She also says that just because she is useless, does not mean she have a reason to flee. The manager also reveals that he bribed Paul for money, and the old man gets excited to hear that. After that, the old geezer tells the prisoners that their faith is worth 100 million. The poisoners then wonders if they are going to give 100 million, and one of them says that he's the man who bought that black, so there is no doubt about it as he is an enormous tycoon. After that, the representative tells the manager that everyone is going to figure out on their own as she has done her part, and she is still an outsider. Meanwhile, Kwang Ho is fighting with the cult leader who says that he has gotten faster. Paul then asks Preacher that didn't he say with certainty that the cult leader doesn't block attacks and thinks that he foofed him. However, the Preacher says that he stopped himself and he's the one who deceived him. Kwang Ho then manages to block the cult leader's attack and tries to punch him, but Kwang Ho stops saying he is strong. He also says that he wanted to fight, but the moment he felt his overwhelming power, his body froze on its own and he admit defeat. Kwang Ho then says that he challenged the cult leader with his own strength, but that weakling Preacher tried to rely on the power of Black Paul Roney. He then asks the cult leader to declare who the real sinner is. The cult leader then shifts his attention and moves toward Preacher, telling him that he is the real sinner in all of this, and that regardless of whether what he did involved lies or not, the bottom line is that he used his own strength to act on it. He also draws a distinction between someone who puts their own strength on the line and risks everything on the outcome versus someone who detects danger coming from a mile away and simply runs from it before it ever reaches them, making it clear that in his eyes it is completely obvious which one of those two people qualifies as the greater sinner. Preacher then turns and calls out to Paul, asking him to step in and help him out of the situation, but Paul stands there and the realization slowly washes over him that Preacher really did betray him after all, and that his instincts about those eyes of his had been right from the very beginning. Paul then locks onto Kwang Ho and charges straight at him, making it clear that he is going to get his revenge no matter what it takes or how long it takes to get there. Kwang Ho stands in the middle of all of this and starts running the situation through his head, thinking that if he focuses on avoiding the cult leader then he is going to find himself going head to head with Paul Roney, but if he turns around and focuses on avoiding Paul then the cult leader is going to be the one coming at him instead. He keeps turning it over and comes to the same conclusion no matter which way he looks at it, which is that it is a whole lot easier and more manageable to throw down with someone he has already gone up against and has some experience reading compared to facing someone completely unknown before Paul can close the distance and get his hands on him. Kwang Ho throws out a fake move that buys him just enough time to slip away and put some space between them. Kwang Ho then comes back around and lands a hit directly on Paul's face, saying out loud that winning is the only thing that actually matters at the end of the day and asking why everything has to be done in some honorable and manly way like Paul seems to want. Kwang Ho then says that none of this is making any sense to him, and even if Paul genuinely misread the situation and thought he had been betrayed, he asks him whether he is seriously trying to kill someone over a misunderstanding like that. He also tells him that the betrayal angle sounds like nothing more than an excuse and that there has to be a completely different and more real reason sitting underneath all of this. Kwang Ho then pushes further and asks him straight up whether the DK League was the one who put him up to killing him, or whether this is something more personal stemming from how their last match went down between them. Paul then finally starts to open up about the real reason behind why he wanted Kwang Ho's body in the first place. Paul Roney then drops something on him that Kwang Ho was clearly not expecting, telling him that the person who actually wants him dead is none other than the girl who has been by his side this whole time, his own manager. Paul then drives him down hard into the ground and says that he had genuinely believed that the girl had already killed him, and that he knows how ridiculous that sounds now that he is saying it out loud, but that everything she said to him is starting to make sense in a way it did not before. After all of that comes out, both of them get right back into it and continue going at each other head on without either one backing down. After that, Paul activates his powers and brings up the fact that people have always told him that if he had just gone ahead and used the terminus from the very beginning of their match, Kwang Ho would have been finished off before the first round even had a chance to wrap up. He also makes it clear that this does not mean he was holding back or not giving everything he had during that fight, and that he made the deliberate choice not to use terminus and instead went at Kwang Ho with his full genuine strength throughout the entire match. Kwang Ho however has absolutely no idea what Paul is going on about and tells him to just cut through all of it and break it down in the simplest terms possible. Paul then looks at him and says it as plainly as it gets, telling him that he is going to kill him, and then shoves Kwang Ho back hard to create some distance between them. After that, he launches himself forward and comes at Kwang Ho with everything he has, saying out loud that he knows Kwang Ho has been hiding a skill of his own this whole time, just the same way Paul himself held back the Terminus from the start of their fight. Kwang Ho reads the incoming punch and manages to deflect it in a completely unexpected way by using his feet to block it, and then immediately counters by firing a kick straight back at Paul in the same motion. He goes on to say that at first it was nothing more than a suspicion he was carrying around, but that looking at Kwang Ho right now up close and in action, he is more certain than ever that his strength, his reflexes, and pretty much everything else about him has noticeably improved since their match together. Kwang Ho then lands another hit on him and follows it up by locking his arm into place, but then tells him that what Paul is seeing is not improvement at all and that he has simply gotten back to where he normally is. He also explains to Paul that when the two of them fought in their match, he had only just come back from being away and his body was nowhere near fully warmed up or operating at the level it should have been, which means Paul was never actually seeing what Kwang Ho is truly capable of in the first place. Kwang Ho then tells him that he is going to knock him out completely right here and right now, and that Paul should save whatever delusions he is holding on to for his dreams because that is the only place they belong. He also tells Kwang Ho that there is no way he is breaking free from this hold through some weak technique like that, and that if he is seriously trying to knock him down he needs to stop wasting both of their time with moves like this and instead bring out the real skill that has grown into something with actual power behind it. Then completely out of nowhere, Paul loses all control over his senses and drops to the ground unconscious without any warning. After standing over him for a moment, Kwang Ho's mind immediately shifts forward and he thinks to himself that the biggest obstacle still standing between him and getting out of all of this is going to be the cult leader, who is already in the middle of dealing with Preacher on the other side of things. The scene then cuts over to the cult leader, who has already slammed Preacher hard into the ground and is standing over him, telling him that he is nothing but a disappointment and a failure and that the entire reason he granted him that power in the first place was so that when a crisis came knocking at his door he would be able to stand up and face it head on and find a way through it using nothing but his own strength. After that, the cult leader kills Preacher right there in front of his closest friends and the girl he had fallen in love with, not showing even a hint of hesitation or remorse in the process. One of his friends immediately loses control and throws a punch at the cult leader out of pure rage and grief, and another friend follows right behind with a kick aimed at him as well. The girl then activates her powers and pushes them as hard as she can, and what she discovers is that Preacher is somehow still alive, which means there is still a chance to save him if they act quickly enough. While the cult leader is in the middle of handling the two boys coming at him from both sides, he shifts his attention toward Kwang Ho and tells him that he genuinely did defeat Paul, and that the depth of faith he carries within him is operating on a completely different level compared to the former pastor who had been going around quietly nurturing and sheltering heretics within the group all along. The cult leader then takes both of the boys down without even breaking his stride and continues walking in a straight and steady line directly toward Kwang Ho as if nothing of any significance just happened. Kwang Ho however stops him before things go any further by throwing out a question, asking him whether beating him in a fight would actually earn him the position of cult leader, because looking at the way everything has been unfolding around him he is finding it genuinely hard to fully believe that is how the succession actually works here. The cult leader says absolutely nothing back in response, so Kwang Ho just shrugs and tells him that it is not like he is going to refuse to fight simply because the answer might turn out to be no. After that, the cult leader generates some kind of energy potion ball and tells Kwang Ho to take this as this is called faith. At that moment, the manager and the others also arrive in the area. The cult leader also tells Kwang Ho that the world calls it superpower. Kwang Ho says that this is the first time he is hearing of this and asks if he can give someone superpowers like this. The cult leader says that this is the nature of this power at the very roots as those who didn't make any effort whatsoever acquire it one day out of nowhere. Kwang Ho explains that he don't believe something like this, but the cult leader finds it strange that he can't even sense the power. The cult leader tells him that he is getting stronger despite that he is not even an ability user and it follows the same principle. Since Kwang Ho is not taking that pill, the cult leader thinks that there is no need to go so far to tell him if he don't know as he can just forcefully turn him into an ability user. The manager then shouts at all the cult members to charge and stop their leader. However, the cult members are starting to panic after seeing that Paul has been defeated and they assume that the leader must have done that. However, the old man then takes off his jacket to bribe them with the gold bar that he brought with him. He announces that this is his emergency fund and that on top of that he has hundreds of billions of won worth of accumulated wealth sitting behind him. Before he even has a chance to finish and officially announce that he is putting up 10 billion for whoever brings him the cult leader's head, every single member in the room charges straight at the leader all at once without waiting for the words to fully land. The old man then turns to the manager with a satisfied look and tells her that now she can go ahead and pay him back that 10 billion with interest on top of it, but the manager takes one look at him and decides he is absolutely out of his mind before turning and taking off running without another word. She then sprints straight toward Kwang Ho and grabs his hand the moment she reaches him, telling him breathlessly that she is here to get him out and that he needs to use this moment to run while he still can. Kwang Ho however shakes his head and refuses to go anywhere with her, telling her that he has more important things he needs to take care of right here before he goes anywhere. He also makes it clear that running is not something he is going to do, and as he says that the superpower pill that the cult leader gave him earlier starts glowing right there in the palm of his hand, which immediately sends a wave of panic through the manager the moment she sees it lighting up like that. Meanwhile, somewhere out on the beach, a group of people finds themselves completely lost and disoriented, and it becomes clear pretty quickly that they all know Paul Roney in some capacity. One of them asks where exactly Paul went off to, and the person with pink hair responds by telling him that even if she explained it, he probably would not believe her anyway. She then goes ahead and tells him that right in the middle of them making their way to the island, Paul suddenly jumped straight off the boat and into the sea without any warning or explanation whatsoever. One of the other more wild-looking people in the group then turns to the guy and asks him whether he genuinely thinks Paul went ahead and decided to take on everyone out there completely by himself. The guy however looks like he is barely holding it together and responds by saying that considering the hypnosis ability has not been broken yet, he does not think that is actually what is going on here. The girl then says out loud that she really cannot wrap her head around why he jumped off like that and that it makes absolutely no sense to her no matter how she looks at it. The guy then straightens up and reminds everyone in the group not to lose sight of the fact that they are here representing the DK League and that carries weight and responsibility. He also brings up the fact that because of everything that has been happening recently, including the incident Kwang Ho caused and the execution incident, the general public has started questioning and doubting the real strength behind these abilities and even whether they genuinely exist at all. He then explains that before that doubt has any chance of spreading further and growing into something they cannot control, they made the calculated decision to tie Kwang Ho down to the lower league for the time being and keep him there. However, the girl thinks that this is not enough because he is an unpredictable guy, so there's a need to steer public opinion before it's too late. It turns out, currently this island has witnessed indiscriminate acts of terror caused by supernatural abilities and they used large-scale psychic abilities targeting 300 people. Unfortunately, the victims of their terror attacks were ordinary civilians. The girl then tells the guys that 300 people seems like an exaggeration and suggests that they should make it 30,000. The guy tells her that an absurdly high number would raise suspicion and the ideal is to present a believable figure. The guy also says that when humans believe in something, it gains power, so it's best to avoid anything that could lead to doubt. He explains that the key point is simple: the terror attack was caused by supernatural abilities, and it was ability users like them who stopped it. After that, they do a broadcast in which one of them tells the civilians that this act of terror destroyed the livelihood of ordinary people in an instant. He then continues to show emotions like crying to manipulate the audience. One of the guy then explains that this trick is working, explaining once they succeed in manipulating emotions, even sloppiness comes off as authenticity, and it makes it harder for others to even voice differing opinions. After that, the group starts moving toward a different location, and as they go they talk among themselves about where exactly the cult leader could be hiding out. The guy explains to everyone that the cult has been using their abilities to conceal their location deliberately, which makes tracking down the cult leader an incredibly difficult task when they are actively working to stay hidden like this. He then tells them that for the time being their best approach is to do things the old-fashioned way and try to narrow down the search visually by getting themselves up to higher ground where they can get a better view of everything spread out below them. Some time passes and the group eventually makes it to a hotel, and the same girl brings up a question that has been sitting in the back of her mind, asking what happens if Kwang Ho turns out to be somewhere in the area and ends up being the one to shut down this terror attack on his own. The guy thinks about that for a moment and then says that if that is what happens it is actually not a bad outcome at all, because it would give them the opportunity to show the public that Kwang Ho, the very person who had stirred up so much doubt and shaken people's belief in the existence of supernatural abilities, was the one who stepped up and put a stop to a real threat. He also adds however that even if Kwang Ho does have some motivation to get involved and stop them, there is still the separate problem that he has no way of figuring out who the actual mastermind pulling the strings behind the whole attack really is. Meanwhile, Kwang Ho stands there still holding onto the pill that the cult leader had handed him, and the manager feels a sharp spike of fear shoot through her as she anxiously wonders whether he is actually seriously considering taking it. In a completely unexpected turn of events, Kwang Ho suddenly shoves her down onto the ground and calmly points out that if he were to go ahead and become an ability user himself, she would no longer have anyone left to make use of and rely on. He then goes on to express how genuinely irritating and frustrating it is for him to keep getting misunderstood and painted as a traitor by everyone around him, and reasons out loud that if that is the way things are going to be regardless, he might as well just go ahead and actually betray everyone at this point and be done with it. Out of nowhere, the preacher's girl makes a sudden and swift move and snatches the pill clean out of Kwang Ho's hand, driven by the desperate thought racing through her mind that it is still not too late to turn things around, and that if the junior pastor can somehow manage to get his abilities restored, there might still be something meaningful she can do to change the outcome of everything. Before she is able to do anything further with it, however, the cult leader steps out and positions himself directly in front of her, reaching out and taking the pill firmly into his own possession. Kwang Ho then breaks into a wide and satisfied smile, reflecting out loud that ever since he first set foot on this island, he has been put through an exhausting and relentless series of ordeals, but that standing here in this moment, it genuinely feels like all of that suffering is finally starting to pay off and reward him in the way he always knew it would. He then directs his words toward the cult leader and makes it clear that he is genuinely looking forward to what is coming, reasoning that when the formidable skills he already naturally possesses come together and combine with a supernatural ability on top of that, he is going to emerge as something on a completely different and unprecedented level altogether. Before the cult leader even gets the chance to bring the pill to his lips, Kwang Ho stops him with a question, bringing up the fact that Paul Roney had said the exact same thing about him that the cult leader had, which is that Kwang Ho has been deliberately concealing and holding back his true and full strength this entire time, and that even by the standards of someone without any supernatural ability whatsoever, he is operating at a level that is far too powerful and exceptional to be considered anywhere close to normal. He also adds that there have simply been far too many things piling up recently that are impossible to overlook or conveniently dismiss without a second thought. The cult leader narrows things down by coldly firing back and questioning whether he has any real or compelling reason to bother answering his question at all. Without missing a beat, Kwang Ho responds by driving a sharp and forceful kick straight into the cult leader's face and wrenching the pill out of his possession, making it absolutely clear that he expects an answer. He then raises the stakes by threatening to crush the pill into nothing if the cult leader refuses to cooperate, but the cult leader refuses to be rattled and instead launches himself forward at Kwang Ho, managing to land an injury on him in the process. The cult leader then states plainly and without flinching that threats hold absolutely no power over him, and that if Kwang Ho genuinely has what it takes to defeat him, then and only then will he get his answer. Kwang Ho says that this was his plan from the start, as he was just trying to get his act together. The manager then quickly hides behind one of the pillars, thinking that Kwang Ho must have a plan, and first, she need to piece together what Kwang Ho said to her earlier. It turns out, Kwang Ho whispered to her that they are on the same team and they are going to catch the cult leader and set the shortest record. The manager really don't get it, that do they really have to risk their life for some kind of record? After that, Kwang Ho and the cult leader fights head to head with each other. Kwang Ho manages to show impressive skills by smashing the cult leader on the ground, but the cult leader still tries to get up, saying he is just weak for sure. The manager finds herself reflecting on the fact that she has never quite been able to wrap her head around why Kwang Ho is so completely and utterly obsessed with breaking the shortest record, but she also recognizes that once he sets his sights on something and makes up his mind to go after it, he will follow it all the way through to the very end, no matter what it takes. With that in mind, she concludes that the smartest and most sensible move available to her right now is to stay out of sight and make absolutely certain that she does not end up getting snatched up and used as a hostage by the enemy. She also comes to the sobering realization that if she was to actually get taken hostage, even Kwang Ho himself would find himself in a seriously difficult and compromised position as a result. She then begins to piece things together and figures that the most likely reason why he had gone through the motions of pretending to threaten her earlier was because she holds real value as a potential hostage, and he was quietly using that situation as an opportunity to study and analyze the capabilities of whoever might try to use her against him. The manager then turns her thoughts to Kwang Ho and works out that he had gone ahead and started his fight against the cult leader with the specific and deliberate goal of setting the shortest record possible, which means that successfully bringing the cult leader down would be the key to making that record a reality. She therefore concludes that the single most useful and meaningful contribution she can make at this moment is to carefully observe and break down the cult leader's abilities and feed that valuable information directly back to Kwang Ho. Shortly after, Kwang Ho and the cult leader launch into a fierce confrontation, and Kwang Ho wastes absolutely no time in getting the upper hand and beating him right from the very start of the exchange. He looks at the cult leader and coolly wonders out loud just how much longer he realistically expects to be able to keep fighting at that level before it all catches up with him. Watching all of this unfold from where she stands, the manager feels a wave of worry wash over her as she processes what she is seeing, and it quickly dawns on her that the very fact that Kwang Ho made the deliberate choice to engage in this fight in the first place means that he must already be carrying a solid and well-founded confidence in his ability to come out on top. It then hits her all at once that Kwang Ho had already figured out and familiarized himself with exactly what the cult leader's ability is well before the fight had even begun. Just at that moment, the old geezer makes an unexpected appearance and immediately orders the manager not to make a single move, informing her in a low and threatening tone that a believer he had successfully bribed is standing directly behind her with a knife pressed and ready. He then turns the pressure up even further by demanding to know why she had not gone ahead and woken up Paul Roney, since doing so would have given her everything she needed to bring this entire situation to a swift and clean end. The old man also reminds her in no uncertain terms that he had already made it perfectly clear to her that if it ever came to light that she had lied about bribing Paul, he would not hesitate to follow through on his promise to kill her. However, the guy holding the knife keeps thinking about the money he is going to get and how he can go back and live a normal life. He tells the manager not to resent him as he got into with this cult because his family was drowning in debt and he had no other choice. He also says that if he gets money things are going to change and he will get to see his little sister, and if he returns with 1 billion, his family will forgive him. Due to the impact on the pillar because of Kwang Ho, the guy pushes away. Kwang Ho manages to beat the cult leader so badly that entire environment changes to beach. The cult leader then shows him the view of the underwater, then saying this is the power he have. The cult leader then takes him to an octopus who completely traps Kwang Ho. In the meantime, the manager is running away from the guy while holding the power pill. She then thinks about how she is such a useless burden on everyone and how she don't have the ability to take responsibility. After that, a window into the manager's earliest and most deeply rooted memory is opened up, and it turns out to be a vivid image of a room lit up in red lightning alongside the heartbreaking sight of her father sitting there looking completely and utterly miserable. As it comes to light, her entire family had been thrown into a state of total collapse following the devastating failure of his business, and she had been absolutely terrified by everything that was unfolding around her. Fear had been the very first real and overwhelming emotion she had ever experienced in her life, as she found herself frozen and completely at a loss for what to do in the face of everything falling apart, and so she did the only thing that she possibly could in that moment, which was to push through no matter how consumed by fear she felt. From that defining day onward, she carried with her the deeply personal belief that as long as she continued doing what she could and pushing herself to try her hardest, everything would ultimately find its way to a better place. She holds firmly onto the conviction that no matter how crushing and unbearable things become, as long as she keeps doing what is within her power, she will find a way to push through and survive it. Not long after all of this, her father abandoned the family entirely and disappeared, and the house which had been put up as collateral against heavy bank loans was subsequently seized and auctioned off to cover the debt. The manager and her sibling came dangerously close to being torn apart from one another as they were placed into the foster care system, and on top of everything else, private creditors kept a watchful and relentless eye on them as they desperately searched for any trace of her father. The manager had carried a deep and burning resentment toward her father for so many years, unable to forgive him for so cowardly abandoning his entire family and running away from everything without looking back. But beyond that, she had also directed an equally heavy and suffocating resentment inward toward herself, unable to let go of the guilt she felt over her own inability to change anything or make any real difference in how things turned out. As time slowly went on, however, she gradually arrived at the realization that there had never been any grand or complicated reason behind it all, and that it had simply come down to her father's own incompetence and weakness that had brought her family crashing down to ruin, and that because she had been nothing more than a small and powerless child at the time, there had never truly been anything she could have done to alter the course of events no matter how hard she had tried. However, there is still one thing that the manager finds herself completely and genuinely unable to wrap her mind around, and that is how Kwang Ho manages to keep stepping into these fights and holding his own the way he does, without possessing any supernatural powers of his own and without even carrying the ability to read and analyze whatever powers his opponent might be bringing against him. Snapping back to the present moment, the cult leader and Kwang Ho are throwing absolutely everything they have at each other in a fierce and grueling exchange, while the manager continues pushing herself to keep running and put as much distance between herself and the chaos as she possibly can. Kwang Ho then makes a sudden and unexpected move by scaling his way up to the top of one of the pillars and perching himself up there completely still, looking every bit as comfortable and unbothered as a monkey sitting in a tree. The cult leader wastes no time in responding by unleashing a series of devastating and full-powered kicks directly into the base of the pillar, striking it with such a force that it eventually gives way and shatters apart into pieces. At the same time, one of the believers then attacks the manager, who dodges his attacks, thinking that at first, she thought Kwang Ho was reckless and she still think about that. The manager runs as fast as she could. That actually makes the believer furious, and in a blink of a second the pillar falls over him. Kwang Ho then grabs the knife. That surprises the cult leader because now he is going to fight using this. Afterward, the cult leader turns to Kwang Ho and questions why he finds it necessary to lean on and rely on such external power, expressing that he had genuinely believed Kwang Ho was someone who placed his faith in nothing but his own raw and natural strength. Kwang Ho tells him plainly that this is his strength and always has been, and then turns the argument right back around on the cult leader by pointing out that he himself has been making full use of his own powers this entire time, and tells him to stop hiding behind excuses and just come at him already and get on with it. The cult leader shifts his tone and tells Kwang Ho that he wants to extend to him a genuine opportunity for redemption, insisting that it is still not too late for him to make the right choice. He urges Kwang Ho to put down whatever weapon he is holding and faces him the way a true fighter should, relying on nothing but his own bare strength and skill to carry him through. Kwang Ho, however, has other ideas entirely, and he craftily distracts the cult leader by pulling a series of strange and deliberately confusing hand gestures that successfully draw his attention away, using that precise moment of distraction to quietly and smoothly conceal something behind his hand without the cult leader noticing. He then thanks the cult leader in a composed and almost cheerful manner for so generously handing him this opportunity to redeem himself. Meanwhile, the manager fights with everything she has to keep her panic from taking over, reminding herself that she knows Kwang Ho better and more deeply than absolutely anyone else around her does. She holds on to the belief that Kwang Ho is the kind of person who places complete and unwavering trust in himself regardless of whatever situation he finds himself thrown into, and that even in this very moment with everything on the line, he is laser-focused on taking the cult leader down and carving out a brand new record in the process. The cult leader then narrows his eyes at Kwang Ho and asks him whether he had actually taken in and understood what he had said to him. Kwang Ho responds by pointing out that the cult leader himself had been the one to tell him to come at him using his real and true strength, and so that is precisely what he intends to do, promising to face him with the single greatest and most powerful skill that he has at his disposal. The manager watches closely from where she is and pieces it all together, realizing in that moment that Kwang Ho is deliberately and calculatedly provoking the cult leader with the specific intention of getting him to lower his guard and leave himself open, and she even catches the subtle and carefully concealed glimpse of the knife that Kwang Ho has been keeping hidden this entire time. The moment the cult leader shifts and moves both of his arms simultaneously, Kwang Ho explodes forward in an instant and drives toward him with the knife aimed and ready. But the cult leader manages to read the move just in time and pulls himself out of the way to dodge it. Without allowing even a fraction of a second to go to waste, Kwang Ho immediately redirects and drives the knife toward the cult leader's neck, declaring this right here is where his victory lies. Before the knife could hit the cult leader's neck, he manages to break free and kicks him away. The leader then notices that he is actually bleeding. Kwang Ho is now on the ground admitting his defeat and tells the leader that he has one favor to ask, and that is he wants a power now. However, the cult leader knows that he is faking it, so he tries to kick but Kwang Ho uses some karate moves to get back up and pushes the cult leader on the ground. The cult leader tells him that the reason he wanted to give him the power called ability was to grant him something. Kwang Ho thinks that this is all too complicated, so they should keep it simple and fight his way so whoever wins will be right. At the same time, the manager finds herself turning over the question of whether Kwang Ho actually went ahead and stabbed the cult leader with that blade, especially considering that Kwang Ho himself had said out loud that he was going to defeat the leader and set a record while doing it. The manager thinks to herself that there is clearly still something about his plan that she does not have the full picture on, but despite all the uncertainty she still finds herself wanting to put her trust in him and believe that he knows what he is doing. The cult leader then sends Kwang Ho flying to the other side of the room with a kick, and by this point Kwang Ho is bruised up badly enough that getting back into any kind of real fighting shape feels nearly impossible. Refusing to just lie there and take what is coming, he decides to resort to something far less dignified and starts playing what can only be described as a childish game with the cult leader, ducking behind a pillar and shuffling around from spot to keep the leader guessing, until he eventually manages to slip away entirely and tucks himself in beside where the manager was sitting. He then turns to her and tells her straight that there is simply no realistic way he can win against that man right now, and that she needs to get herself out of there as fast as she possibly can. When he looks over expecting to see the manager sitting there, however, the person next to him is not the manager at all but the billionaire old man from before, which catches Kwang Ho completely off guard. The old man turns to Kwang Ho and tells him that he will hand over 1 billion to him if he can manage to wake Paul up. Kwang Ho, however, does not look particularly convinced by any of that, and the old man acknowledges that since this is literally the first time the two of them have ever met, it would make complete sense for him not to trust him right off the bat. The old man then makes a completely unexpected move and takes off running straight toward the cult leader, dropping a pile of gold cash right there on the floor in front of him and getting down to beg for mercy while the money is still scattering around his feet. Kwang Ho takes advantage of the distraction and spots the manager sitting off to the other side of the room and tells her quietly but firmly to run. The two of them then get down low and start crawling their way toward the exit as carefully and quietly as they possibly can without drawing any attention. The manager moves alongside him and thinks to herself that she has a whole flood of questions she desperately wants to ask Kwang Ho right now, but that the smart thing to do in this moment is to keep her mouth shut and just follow his lead and get out first. Kwang Ho and the manager push through and manage to make it out of the room, and then work their way through the facility hallways with Kwang Ho asking her as they go whether she has any idea which direction the way out is in. When it becomes clear that there is simply no accessible exit anywhere nearby, Kwang Ho does not waste any more time thinking about it and smashes straight through one of the windows, and when they both look down they see nothing but ocean stretching out below them, and Kwang Ho turns to her and tells her plainly that this is the only way out they have got. At that moment, the manager confesses that from the beginning, she was planning to use him and that's the reason why she cancelled his permanent ban. She says that she thought he were someone who acted deliberately, and even if he weren't, she believed she could control him. However, she explains that she could never really get a proper handle on him because he was always moving in unpredictable and reckless ways that she could not anticipate, and she had started to feel like everything she was doing was wrong, so she kept trying to fix things, but nothing she tried ever seemed to actually work. She also says that looking back on all of it now with some distance, she can see that what was really driving everything was a deep fear of failing, and that fear pushed her into a constant state of worry, but the more she worried and tried to control the outcome, the closer she actually ended up getting to the very failure she was so desperate to avoid. He on the other hand was sitting in the exact same situation she was in, facing all the same pressures and uncertainties, and yet instead of worrying he just smiled through it like none of it could touch him. Over time, she came to the realization that he had developed feelings for her, and once she understood that she found herself wanting to be acknowledged by him in a way she had not wanted from anyone before. She also admits that when he kidnapped her and brought her out to this island against her will, there was a part of her deep down that was secretly relieved about it, which surprised even herself. The manager then shares that once they make it off this island, she is planning to step down and resign from her position as CEO and leave it all behind. The manager then reaches out and grabs the purple potion to use it, but Kwang Ho steps in and stops her, telling her that she does not need to worry about any of it as he already has a way to take care of both of their problems at the same time. How long do you think it will take for Kwang Ho to finally break every record and prove that a non-ability fighter can stand at the top? Comment ability if you'd like a part 2 of this series. Make sure to like and subscribe the channel for more sports manhwa recaps.